Seen it. Is it one of the initial?
Okay, good morning everyone. It is 9:30, so this Newham local examination hearing session is open. William Fieldhouse, the Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the plan. Can everyone, and in particular the lady at the back there, hear me okay? Sophie Edwards on my left is a colleague of mine. She's a planning inspector, been a planning inspector for a number of years. She's working on planning appeals and other casework. Not yet local planners. But as part of the training for conducting local planning examinations next year, she's spending a couple of days here with us in Newham to see how things should be run. I am the inspector, so I'm responsible for the examination. Sophie is here to she won't be involved in the examinations I make about. Just a few housekeeping points, please. First, a reminder that this session is being broadcast live on YouTube, so extra reason to behave. I don't know what's actually nothing's going on, so it's not too distracting. A reminder, if you could switch mobile phones and laptops, etc., to silent. Water is provided at the table and get refilled during adjournments. So please don't bring hot drinks, etc., into this room. Toilets are located on the ground floor, out back through the door, out into the lobby area, right to the right and on the left of the staircase. No fire alarm tests planned for today. So if the alarm does go off, it's a sort of 30 second or so alarm sound. You need to vacate the building, which is back through the door, out of the lobby, out of the main entrance, outside the building, and the assembly point is the assembly point opposite the DLR section. It's around there.
At the end,
yeah. Okay, thank you. Any other housekeeping points that I've not? I didn't covered everything.
There would be one point. If anybody actually needs assistance to get out of the building, just let my colleague Rory know.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. The program, so I'm sure you met with around today, so queries about the examination. So the agenda for today, hopefully you've seen, we're dealing with some one this morning and various under that. And we set not before 2 o'clock, but it's a separate session on the amount of development required in the plan period. In terms of timings for today, we'll probably have a break around 20 minutes this morning, around 11 o'clock, something like that, depending on where we are on the agenda. we'll break for lunch around 1 o'clock. We'll start again at 2 o'clock this afternoon. We'll do a break then, and aim to finish by 5 o'clock. I don't think I've actually asked the council what to have the rooms available to, but I don't want to go up to 5, but we can for okay. Just a reminder, I'm sure you're all aware, the national planning policy that we are considering this plan in the context of is subject to the transitional arrangements and current NPPF, which was published in December 2024 and slightly updated in February 2025. Transitional arrangement in paragraph 234D related to the SPS being in place, I think. So, anyway, the transitional arrangement will be examining this plan in the context of NPPF December 2023, which hopefully that was made clear in my guidance note. I've been aware of that. The purpose of this examination is how we decided the plan submitted on the 18th of July 2025 is legally compliant and sound, if not, how it could be modified to ensure it is. So I'll start each agenda item with some questions to the council, and when we hear the responses to those, I'll allow others to speak. If you do wish to speak when you listen to the council or subsequently when you further to say, if you put your name plate on end at an appropriate time. Which brings me on to the microphones. You will have spotted there are a limited number of microphones. There are 2 on this side and 1 on that side, so it's going to have to be a matter of passing the microphone along, I'm afraid. They do, I mean, it's picking my voice up okay, is it?
Yes, I can hear.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be immediately close to you, but it doesn't need to be, you might need to hold it up a bit higher, they're a bit pointing down. Maybe Rory said it to me like that. We'll have to just see how it goes. So it'll be a matter of, when I say to the make sure you put a microphone near to where you are. It's not essential for the purposes of the YouTube broadcast. I think that's being picked up by a microphone here. So it's going to benefit people in the room. And when you speak, you tend to speak towards me. You may not. But it does mean that other people further down the end of the room may find it difficult to hear. So it is probably more microphones to pick up voice. So we'll see how we get on with that. So in terms of what you need to say and what you don't need to say, I've read all the written statements and I'm aware of the representations. So there's no need to repeat and quote from those. So contributions to respond to the specific questions I ask and points made by others. As a guide, it's not a fixed rule. I'm not looking for long speeches but contributions. A couple of minutes or so should be sufficient, and you have a chance to come back and say something else later. And when we finish on an agenda item, I'll go back to the council and see if they've got any final comments they wish to make and what others say. So that's probably how we'll run it. A reminder, the deadline for submission of written statements has passed. You should not expect to submit additional written material during our after hearing session unless specifically asked for it. Otherwise, the examination will become unmanageable and potentially never come to a conclusion. Many modifications. The council included a schedule of proposed modifications for the documents that it submitted with the plan in July. However, as I explained in my guidance notes, those do not form part of the plan that I am examining. And some of those modifications may not necessarily be essential for soundness or legal compliance. So what I said in my guidance note was that when the council considers the questions that I am asking, if they think that a main modification is relevant to address the issue that I've raised, and this may arise as we go through these discussions as well. It may well be that then one of those major modifications that you've worked up in having taken account of rate 19 representations, etc., may become relevant. So that's what the words are the words in this document that I'm examining, and the modifications that the council has proposed in response to my questions so far were published in document ED6 on the 21st of November. So that's the schedule of our notification we've got. Some of which are relevant to what we're talking about today, others will be relevant as we go through this first week. Okay, so I hope that's clear enough. Since you submitted your written statements in response to my matters, issues and questions in document 983. A number of other documents have been published. And I'm just going to run through those now, or the variables anyway, just to make sure everyone's aware of them and what they are and what their relevance may be to what we're talking about today and the rest of this week. So the first one was ED5, which is a statement of common ground in Thames Water. I don't know when it's published since the deadline for statement. So the point of these is obviously you've not had a significant chance to refer to them in your written statement. So they may contain information that you wish to discuss at these hearing sessions. So my understanding of the Thames Water statement of common ground will be relevant to matter 4, in particular the Beckton neighbourhood, which we will do tomorrow, I think, probably. So that was that one. The statement of common ground is the GLA. That was that will be relevant potentially to matter 2, and it'll be relevant to various other matters as we go through the examination. So that one's ED7, sorry. ED8 was some housing land supply pro formas that the council helpfully filled in based on a sort of template that I provided, which will be relevant to the allocations as we go through them in matter 4. ED9 is a summary of the 5-year housing land supply. That isn't relevant, I don't think, to matters 1 to 4, not directly anyway, but we will come on to that when we deal with the overall housing land supply in whatever matter that is, 6 or something, I think it is. That's not right. So that's been published. And then some viability evidence that isn't exactly new. It's reformatted and represented in response to request by me, I think. So first of all, we had ED10, which were the extracts of the various tables summarising the viability findings in the published viability report, with the site allocations referenced in it. So that was published. That was ED10. And then subsequent to that, following my further questions at the end of last week, and this was probably only published yesterday, may or may not be aware of this, it's ED11 and ED12, which again, is the same information, so it's not exactly new evidence, but it's presented the evidence in a way that is helping me to understand what it's telling us. So that was published as ED11, ED12. We are dealing with viability, and I'm conscious that you've not had a great deal of time to look at that, but we will come back to viability when we go through the allocations. We may come back to viability overall later. We will also consider the implications of what that viability evidence tells us when we consider various matters, including policy relating to affordable housing requirements, etc. So today is a first stab at understanding the viability evidence and then clarifying some of the things about it. And then, as I say, we can come back. I'm coming close to finishing this introductory, and I'll be shorter in future sessions. I like to, as I go through the examination, hopefully there are certain things that will be clarified in terms of potential modifications that may be required with things that may need to be done. And I usually publish what I call an action point note at the end of each week of hearing sessions. We've got 2 consecutive weeks of hearings this week and next. It may be, depending on what comes out of this first week, I may or may not do a note for this week. If I don't, I will certainly do a note for that week and from this week. So I'll make that clear later in the week. The first item on the agenda is introduction. To make, before we do, let's pass the microphone around the table and introduce themselves. So I'll start on this side so the council can show us all how it has to be done. The microphone, and I'm going to start this end. And if you could just briefly introduce yourself, your name, and what your role is. Okay.
Hi everybody, I'm Darren Mackin, Director of Police Media Council. are responsible for the council's planning, regeneration and economic development services.
Morning, everyone. My name is Antonia Maria.
Good morning, my name is Rory Dowds and I'm a policy planner in the policy team.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stanley Edmund and I'm the Interim Planning Policy Manager.
Good morning, Anthony Deacon, our real estate, and we are working with the authority on viability matters.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the Principal Planner in the
Good morning, James Canterbury, Senior Planner in the Planning Policy.
Okay, thank you. So if I could start at the top end of the table and work our way down here. Good morning. John.
Hi, John Roche, I'm Director of Rob Planning, representing Planning.
Good morning, Thomas Hatch, Director of Quad, Horizon St William on viability matters.
Good morning, everybody. I'm the Planning Director at Quad, also advising senior homes.
Mr. Stevens.
James Stevens, Home Builders Federation.
Okay, thank you. And hello to everyone. Could you hear everyone?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, you probably didn't come for this purpose, but it's been very helpful. Thank you. Okay. Right. Unless there are any procedural questions, is everything working okay, Roland?
It's a bit quiet,
Just ask 1 minute.
So it doesn't.
Okay, yeah, we're good.
I might be able to change the settings so it doesn't, the battery saver, it will log out. But if the stream's ready so you carry on, I can just work away on it, or is that distracting?
How long do you think it take?
A minute or so, I just need to make sure the screen doesn't close down.
Okay, we'll just have a pause.
Okay. All right.
Read your viability sheets.
I just need to move the mouse every sort of few minutes, just to keep moving.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good to go.
Read the mouse. Right. Okay. Okay. So let's just resume now. So if I want to hand over to Mr. Mackin and give a introductory statement on behalf of the council.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you, Darren, on behalf of the council. So Newham is a thorough shape by water. To the west flows the River Lee, and to the south the Thames, and the east the Roden. Generations these rivers defined the borough, dividing the place into two halves. In the centre and the north, neighbourhoods grew up along historical Essex, and along the river's industry and infrastructure dominated. But as you know, times have changed. Since the closure of the road docks, those industrial areas have begun a remarkable transformation. Today, Newham stands at the heart of London's regeneration. Homes, modern workspaces, schools, cultural venues and retail facilities arising here at a scale greater than anywhere else in the capital. Our location is strategic. We sit at the crossroads of the London, Stansted, Cambridge, Peterborough corridor, hub of enterprise and innovation in the southeast of England. We're also part of the Thames Creative Estuary Corridor and Cultural Industries Corridor. Within our boundaries lie 3 opportunity areas: the Olympic legacy, which covers parts of the 5 Olympic coast boroughs, the Hackney, Newham, Tower Hamlets, Waltham Forest, and Greenwich; Poplar Riverside, which crosses the boundary with Tower Hamlets; and the Road Docks in Beckton, where we're sitting today, which is home to London's only enterprise zone and one of the UK's largest regeneration projects. We are, as a borough, exceptionally well connected, benefiting from 5 new Elizabeth Line stations alongside 28 Transport for London stations. The vast majority of them are centrally accessible. Investment in this transport infrastructure has transformed how people move across our borough and into central London. And of course, just recently, the Mayor of London announced the fantastic news for London and for Newham and for Greenwich, of course, that the Docklands Light Railway extension to Thamesmead is going ahead and has been backed by government investment. As the Mayor said, this has been something that's long called for, and it will create jobs for Londoners and help deliver thousands of new homes here in Newham and also in Greenwich. For Newham, these stronger connections mean greater opportunity and potential, particularly significant for Beckton Riverside, one of London's largest remaining brownfield sites, where new home jobs and community facilities will be unlocked by this investment. Together, these transport improvements across the borough ensure that regeneration in Newham is not only ambitious but deliverable and secures our role at the heart of London's future growth. Of course, it's worth noting across the road from here as well, we're home to London City Airport. So we have the only airport, London Airport for London postcode, and it is the financial centre of the international gateway, and it's connected in the heart of East London. It's really important, of course, that Newham is not just a place, it's the people of the place. Our population has grown rapidly. It's up 14% in the last decade and making us the 3rd largest borough in London. By 2030, we expect to have almost 500,000 residents living here. We are young, diverse and global. Over 200 languages are spoken, and more than half of our residents were born abroad. Yet, of course, we face challenges. Poverty and inequality remain pressing. Over a quarter of our wards are amongst the most deprived in England, driven by fuel poverty, high rents and low incomes, which weigh heavily on families. It's on record that COVID-19 and the cost of living crisis hit this borough harder than most, and council's working hard to address these issues. Today, of course, Newham is facing a homelessness crisis, which is driving some of these difficult outcomes for some of our communities. We have the highest number of people in temporary accommodation in the entire country, and as of mid-2025, that was over 14,500 households in temporary accommodation. Of course, this is driven by a shortage of social housing, escalating private rents, rising far faster than wages, causing people income insecurity and poverty. The spiralling costs of this temporary accommodation, which of course is a statutory obligation for the council, have left the council facing a budget deficit. We're working hard for our housing needs services and with partners, some of who are in this room, to deliver new homes to help address this need. The demand is immense and the financial pressure on the council is severe. The council is in a period of obtaining exceptional financial support from central government, which is in effect asset sales in order to help support the general fund budget. The situation is very challenging. We also know that Newham as a place has struggled to meet its housing delivery targets. For several years, we have constantly under-delivered. There are reasons for this. Much of our housing comes from large, complex, multi-phase developments, which can take many years to complete. Our housing targets are also high. The London plan requires you to deliver 32,800 homes by 2028-29, and then plus another 14,800 homes in the LLDC, Olympic Legacy Corporation area. We're aware, of course, of the wider challenges in the housing delivery market. Developers are facing viability and funding challenges, which have compounded this shortfall. It's a shared challenge, and we're committed to how to address that work with partners. And despite this challenge, as we've said, we are responding. In the emerging local plan, we have set an ambition to deliver 54,000 homes over the plan period. That reflects the growth of ambition, the scale of ambition in Newham, the needs, and also the role that we can play as part of the wider London housing story and solution. But we have to be clear, this isn't just about numbers. There are significant pressures for more genuinely affordable housing, particularly homes at social rent and homes that families can truly afford, to help address some of those economic and financial insecurity challenges our communities face. This is why the council has set out an ambitious programme around housing, putting central social rent at its heart. This includes the council delivering its own social rented homes, the proposal to set a target of 50% social rent in new developments, and to significantly increase house building across the borough, working with development partners. This position is twofold, I guess. It's to help the life chances and circumstances that the residents have described before who are living in these increasingly insecure circumstances, but it will also help to address Newham's budget deficit. The high cost of providing temporary accommodation is the primary driver of the council's financial challenges at the moment. And over the next 3 years, unless this demand can be reduced further, the council must find savings of around £175 million in order to pay the bill for the temporary accommodation in effect. But it's important to note that Newham is a resilient place. Life expectancy is similar to the national average, and levels of happiness here are higher than in many other places. We know that our residents are ambitious, resourceful and proud, and the council's role is to help them to achieve their ambitions. Our economy is increasingly dynamic. We have nearly 14,000 businesses. Most of them are small but are growing. Jobs have increased by more than 50% since 2015. However, productivity and pay remain below London averages, and too many of our residents are paid lower than the London living wage. Our neighbourhoods are diverse and distinctive. From Stratford to Green Street, from Custom House to Cannon Town, each has its own identity, and our high streets are vital, both in retail, food and services, and in some cases like Green Street, connecting us to international works of culture and commerce. Our environment is rich but fragile. We have 70 parks and green spaces, including the Olympic Park, the Thames Barrier Park, and in the Royal Docks, a vast expanse of water with untapped potential. Yet only 10% of our land is green space, and the tree cover is amongst the lowest in London. Air pollution is the highest in England, with serious impacts on health. And Newham is identified as one of London boroughs at most extreme risk from flooding. From the rivers, from the sea, from surface water and sewers. Our low-lying topography, extensive man-made surfaces, and reliance on pump drainage systems makes us vulnerable to flash flooding when intense rainfall overwhelms the system. So it's partly why in 2019 the council declared a climate emergency and has developed a just transition plan and wider strategies to tackle these concerns. Our policies brought forward in the local plan are not therefore arbitrary. They are essential responses to our unique environmental vulnerability. We aim to change how we live, work and move, and to build a more sustainable future. So I hope you've gathered from this that Newham is a borough of contrast, a place of immense opportunity, but also deep challenges. It's an extraordinarily diverse place, but one where many people struggle. Our local plan is the moment to harness regeneration as a force for fairness, to tackle inequality, confront homelessness, stabilise the council's finances, and deliver on our administration's manifesto commitments. That is genuinely affordable homes with over 50% in new developments at social rent, and a significant uplift in house building. At the same time, the plan represents our opportunity to safeguard communities from pollution and flooding, and to ensure that every resident shares fully in the benefit of Newham's transformation.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a helpful overview. If you wish to put that in the examination library, I'm very happy to starting point. So thank you for that. Right. Unless there's any questions that we've got, we'll head up to the agenda. There's not clock through, it means I'll have to glance at my laptop every now and again to keep an eye on the time. So it's 10 o'clock now, and we'll start with the first agenda item, which is the duty to cooperate. So the duty to cooperate applied during the preparation of the plan up until the examination on the 8th of July, Regulation 22. The Council's duty to cooperate statement and addendum and the associated statements of common ground provide information about engagement with local planning authorities for the bodies and strategic matters. And the council has advised me in response to any questions that no of those other authorities or bodies that play the duty to cooperate as well complied with. By coincidental timing, at the end of last week, there was a written ministerial statement to the planning inspector, which basically set out the government's intention, clear intention, that the duty to cooperate is going to be removed legislation under the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, which we did know. What was new on Friday was that when the regulations are brought in early next year, they will get rid of the duty, including for plans progressing under the current legislation, including plans that are at examination. So, if you were going to fail the duty to cooperate, saved by that announcement, if indeed it comes in by the end, because by the end of the examination, it would no longer apply. That's my understanding of it. I'll open it up for others in a moment. But that said, the national policy remains the same. The national policy is that local authorities are required to engage effectively on an ongoing basis during the preparation of the plan, etc., etc. So that will remain for plans, and it will remain for this plan. It just means that if I concluded that the council had not effectively engaged, etc., etc., the consequence may not be a failure of the duty and hence a failure of the plan. It may be a soundness issue that we need to explore. That said, from what I've read, and others can tell me otherwise if they disagree, it seems to me that the evidence that we provide people and things that I've read from others suggests that you have to cooperate and it has been effective during the preparation of the plan. And I don't think anyone's actually made a suggestion to the contrary. Anything the council wish to say in response to that? I know it's all come rather late. As I say, I don't think the consequences for this plan are huge, and it's no surprise to me, it's very sensible. It may be sometimes, but that's not how I'm concerned. So anything the council wishes to say in response to that?
Simply to agree with you.
I don't think that might be close. It seemed to put out just the mechanism coming to the end and at the end of time.
I think I need to replace red.
Shall I wait or shall I just
I think I heard from everyone here. Tony.
Is that okay?
I can hear you, but
Don't worry about me. I think I can hear
So,
I can hear with that microphone.
the council's position is that we completely agree with what the inspector has just said. And though the information comes at a late stage, it has no bearing on our plan for several reasons, in part because we are at examination and the evidence before everyone and the inspector shows quite conclusively that we have had an ongoing and effective program of cooperation with all of our neighboring boroughs and wider cooperate partners. It's still in the NPPF, completely agreed with that, so it's still part of our examination process. And in effect, it will remain an important element in plan making because cooperation is essential for placemaking. So in that regard, we continue to maintain we have met our legal requirement and plan masonry.
okay, thank you. The batteries?
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Got a quick test, Antonio. Sorry, it's not on yet. Hang on. No, hang on.
Just testing.
Yes.
There we go.
Okay, right. Anything anybody else has wished to say about duty to cooperate or effective cooperation on strategic matters? No, okay. Right, so we can move on. The next item on the agenda, this last one is different things that I have to address for legal compliance reasons, essentially, and other particular matters. Public consultation, obviously, there's a requirement to carry out public consultation in accordance with expected involvement. The Council's Regulation 22 statement advises that the consultation was in accordance with the statement of community involvement. Confirm that in the statement. The thing has been suggestion to otherwise, although there are some representations that criticise the consultation carried out on a number of grounds, which I'll just briefly mention, and you can respond to them. The volume of information and the complex language made documents difficult to understand. Marginalised communities were not effectively engaged with. There was a lack of proper engagement with community groups, community leaders, residents, and landowners. Without dealing with specifics, we can deal with specifics. Sorry, do you want to?
So, sorry.
The GU2 problem.
No, I think Charlotte just said somebody to take over from her role as mouse toggler.
Okay. Sorry. So, I mean, we can deal with these issues raised in relation to specific sites allocations because the people involved may be critical and maybe a person to be able to explain what their concerns were. But just in terms of the general, you want to respond in terms of the efforts that the council made and the commitment to community involvement as to how you try to make the consultation effective and reach different groups, etc., etc.
Yeah, of course. So the minimum commitments that were set out in our statement of community involvement were to make the documents available online and in libraries and at our principal office. That notifications were sent to our consultation database, and consultations lasted at least 6 weeks. And then in terms of accessibility, we also committed to timing, ensuring that consultations timing considered public holidays. The documents were in accessible formats and copies were provided for digitally excluded groups. But we actually went beyond those commitments set out in the statement of community involvement. In the Regulation 22 statement, SD17, it details a wide range of methods which are consistent with the suggested methods in the SCI table 3, which is proposed methods, not the commitments, the proposed methods we might use in a public consultation. You can find them on page 11 and 12. And these included the website and digital platforms with interactive commenting tools, email notifications and stakeholder database emails, social media campaign and promotional videos on YouTube and were shared on social media platforms, local public notices which were sent out in a news recorder, which reached people who were digitally excluded. We also had a Newham article, which is an internal council publication. We had posters and digital advertising boards around the borough to promote our public consultation. We also held in-person events, such as drop-in sessions where members of the public could come and ask questions about how to submit a response and ask any questions to us about how they could engage with the consultation. We also held Regulation 18 community assemblies at libraries around the borough. And we also made efforts to reach out to marginalised community groups, which I'll come on to in a second, but we had community events with those groups in person. We also had online informative sessions and workshops, which were on Teams, which helped allow people who might not have been able to attend our in-person events to have an opportunity to attend. All these methods aligned with our statement of community involvement commitments, and we had a varied and inclusive approach, which included innovative techniques and outreach to underrepresented groups. If I could just go into how we might reach some of these underrepresented groups, our Regulation 22 statement, SD17, confirms our measures to address some of the digital exclusion policies, which included a browse aloud feature on our website, which allows viewers to translate materials into multiple languages, which represent a spread across the borough. We also had targeted postcard drops of Regulation 18, which targeted areas with low uptake in engagement, which the postcards included a link to the concession website and translation as well into languages. And we also provided presentations to community groups. If you see Regulation 22, Appendix 1, Section 3.412 and Appendix 2, Section 382. Sorry, quite complex appendices, but you can find the evidence of our consultation used there, and these reflect the SCI, the community involvement requirements for inclusivity and compliance with the Equality Act 2010.
Thank you. I was going to ask about languages because I mean, you obviously referred to 200 languages, which is, you've got a document in English, obviously, and you've got language diverse in terms of languages. So was there much uptake in terms of using the browser aloud feature and any requests for any sort of translations and things? Or?
There's no way to measure people who used it, but it was available online as an accessible tool. But we didn't have any, there's no evidence that we could prove that. Yes.
No, anyway, thank you for that. It's helpful. I mean, it's an interesting range of efforts to be made, and obviously, and just observe it goes beyond what I think is probably fairly typical. So I wouldn't suggest that you've neglected in efforts to reach that. So anyway, it's an issue that we can come back to under such matters if people have concerns about it. So thank you for that. Unless there's any comments from anybody on this side, we'll move on. To a linked issue, obviously the public sector Equality Act applies both to the council but also to the examining plan. Carrying out an equality impact assessment during preparation of plan as part of the integrated impact assessment. This finds that there are policies in the plan which could have significant positive effects on people who share protected characteristics. I don't think it identified any negative effects. It's always it's an assessment that's done. It was available to comment on if they disagree with it. A number of Regulation 19 representations do actually, at least two mention the Equality Act and do raise some concerns. I think it maybe links back to some of the things we've already talked about, and we will come back to in relation to one particular allocation. So I don't think we need to go into any more detail. So, I mean, I don't think there's any suggestion that I've seen evidence of that the council's failed under the Equality Act. Obviously, I will bear in mind my responsibility under that as we go through this examination. Anything you want to add or say to sponsor or add?
Just a couple of procedural points of support. So, completely agree. We do consider we've met our equality. The integrated impact assessment does mention that the plan overall provides substantial benefits in the round. What we have done as part of the equality impact assessment is look at a great variety of data available to the council from sources, internal and external. And we've put this in context and analyzed each chapter of policies in relation to the 3 duties. So about prevention of discrimination, advancing equality of opportunity, and fostering relations. And on balance, all of the policies work together to create this positive effect.
Okay. The government plan, which it contains policies, including the opportunity areas and major transformation areas, etc. And it contains policies about, I think, kind of monitoring the effects of that significant change on the communities, because obviously that can be, like you said, you want to significant change that people have gone through in the last few decades in the plan. Is there anything in the plan about kind of monitoring the effects of change on particular communities?
I will have to check that. There is an in principle commitment as we progress with the plan that qualities are on.
Because of the issue, the significant transformation change has obviously beneficial effects, change and etc. etc. It can also affect people because things change and certain things are lost through that transformation change, and they can impact people in different ways. It's another one but I think it's I haven't actually got a session about monetary plan. Does it contain a monetary framework plan? So maybe just make a note of that and just have a brief discussion about that. Anybody else wish to say with the equalities item? Right, another legalistic quirk that we have to deal with. The reasons for this go back to the 2004 Act, which envisaged, most of you are probably too young to remember all this, but I was involved at the time. It involved local development frameworks, the kind of portfolio effect that you could have rather than having a full local plan. You could have a series of plans. So the way the legislation was built was that by doing that, you had to be, when you published a new portfolio for your plan, you had to make clear how it fitted with the previous bits that you'd made or wanted to supersede. So anyway, that's the background of it. But the regulations do require a plan to be explicit about what they are superseding in previously adopted plans. The plan as submitted, I don't think does that. I think it's clear what it's doing. It's superseding everything that's gone before it and the council adopted, and you proposed a modification to the introduction to say that. So there are 3 plans that would be superseded in their entirety. One was the Newham Local Plan 2018, the Newham Use and Travel Development Document 2017, and the London Legacy Development Corporation Local Plan 2020. So the statement was saying that they're being superseded in their entirety, which seems clear enough to me. The way the regulations are written, you could say, well, actually, are you doing what you need to do? Is it just to talk about the plan being examined, which contains a policy that is intended to supersede another policy in the adopted plan, and the plan states that fact and identifies the superseding policy. So what that means that some councils do, and it's rather laborious, you list all the policies in the previous plans in some sort of appendix, and you list policies in the new plan that supersede those. I'll leave it with you. I don't know if anyone's got any views on this side of the table, whether they have a strong view about that or a view at all about that. I don't have a strong feeling about it. If you do that, anything you want to say?
I think while I've seen that we supersede the Newham Local Plan 2018 covers every policy in that plan, and I think the wording is sufficient to avoid to comply with that regulation.
Well, I'll leave it at that for now. No one's got any view about that. So if there is a risk, I think it's very minimal, and it's a decision I'm happy for the council to make in terms of how they want to do that. I think it's fair enough. But I'm not the ultimate any legal challenge, so we'll leave it at that. It brings on to another thing. This isn't a legal requirement. This is an NPPF requirement that local planners should distinguish between what policies are strategic and which are not strategic, and that's a clear requirement of the NPPF. The only actual implication, I think, is that neighbourhood plans have to be in general conformity with strategic policies. They don't have to be in general conformity with non-strategic policies. So the first question, I think, is what's the neighbourhood plan situation in Europe? Are there any designated neighbourhood forums?
Designated neighbourhood forums for that.
So it's a bit academic, this probably. That said, there's a lot of discretion in what's a strategic plan, a strategic policy, and what isn't. There is quite a lot of words in the BPG and strategic. You've chosen to categorise nearly all of the policies in the plan, apart from 3. You obviously thought about it and picked out these 3, or whatever. 4, maybe 4. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, which is a good exercise. You're satisfied with strategic needs. It's a fairly broad criteria in the NPPF. Yes.
Yeah.
There have been a suggestion. I don't know if that you could take some of the others out as being non-strategic. For example, shop fronts. Just one example. I don't know. Does anybody want to say anything? Simply, you went through. You had a bit of time to go through and play with this issue.
I think we just felt that there were a number of strategic policies which, when looking at the guidance, could be termed non-strategic policies, and that weren't meeting that definition of non-strategic. It's not the framework explains that different way it needs to be applied to whether it's a strategic or non-strategic policy. So if you've got a policy that really is dealing with the detail around detailed design or shop front or advertising, we're sort of struggling to see how that informs the sort of strategic priorities for the borough. And without to go through them on a policy by policy basis, we did give a handful of examples in our hearing statement of where we don't think that complies essentially with the framework guidance.
Yeah, I mean, it's not sort of saying they couldn't be categorised differently. They could have been. I mean, I think that's kind of some discretion in there. That it's sort of, they could have been. I mean, are you saying they really should be? I mean, that needs to be modified, or are you saying, well, it doesn't really matter?
Yeah, I think it's one of the more substantive things, but I guess it is that point around how much weight is applied to policies. And more weight is being applied to a policy that really should be non-strategic, and it's incredibly detailed. The shop fronts and advertising one's a good example that really is dealing with the grand scheme of things, minutiae. And does that really warrant having as much weight applied to a policy like that as it is to policy on around housing delivery?
When you say more weight, where is it that it's where? Yeah, at the end, in terms of examining plans, I think it sort of suggests the level of scrutiny is going to be in decision making. Is there any distinction?
We talk about proportionality, I think, on strategic policy. About what paragraph?
That's in examining it, isn't it?
Yes, it might.
It's decision making, isn't it?
Yeah, potentially. It's the 2024 NPPF, but it is to do with the test of sound, which is, exactly.
So the fact that the category of strategic means I've got to be more thorough in my examination of them than if they were non-strategic.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
But it does, but in decision making, there isn't anything in the NPPF that suggests there's any different weight in decision making.
No.
So in that sense, it, again,
yeah.
doesn't matter.
It's not what it's substantive points, it's just
Anything you want to say?
So even policies that are detailed or are still considered strategic because they shape the long-term outcomes across the borough and directly address identified priorities and issues. And that's the kind of assessment that we use to decide between the strategic and non-strategic. So even though they're detailed, they still do address priorities in line with the NPPF. And I've got notes on why we policies that we think are non-strategic is strategic to about that.
I don't think so. I mean, if the council's strategic, if shop fronts are a strategic priority, the council, yeah. Right, thank you. Which does bring me on to something that probably is a bit more meaningful. It's the plan, which is a big plan, detailed plan. Well, the local planning is almost done it. So, I think local planning applications in Newham, we've got over 1,000 pages. Needs to go through. But that's what it is. And generally, I think it's a well-written plan. And it's clear what it's trying to do. We'll go through it, but I mean, I'm not being critical of it. There's always a tension, isn't there? You know, national policy forever has been talking about succeeding plans and etc. And there's a lot of plans that are big, and That's not necessarily a bad thing. Anyway, the substantive point under this issue is, are we clear in this plan what our policies are, what are not policies, and the status of various things? Because that is important, because the legislation does set a hierarchy of the policy to everything else in the plan. So it is important for the plan to clear what policies are for that reason. So you responded to my previous questions, and you said, one of the plan, the policies are the boxes that are labelled BFN 1 or if I turn here, H3, that's there. It doesn't say policy BFN 1 or policy H3, which would make it very clear. But fair enough, I think it's reasonably clear what the policy is. In part 2, it's slightly more. You propose a modification here, I think, to clarify this, or 2 modifications to clarify this. Your first response was that the neighbourhood policy, so for example, N1 on that box, colour box, is a policy, but vision bit next to it isn't. Yep. And when it comes to the allocations, the allocation policy, the number N1, SA1, and the allocation, that's a policy. When you first responded, you said also that the other box was the self-information equals policy, but changed that in your written correct? And then, so in part 2 of the plan, it's the neighbourhood policy in the box, and it's the allocation policy in the box. And then we bring us on to the site maps, which are, again, don't just have a title map, the name of the site. They're a key, and the words in the key are not really qualified. There are key routes and sensitive edge. So, well, opportunity to bring space open. Anyway, you proposed a modification to clarify that they are indicative diagrams. So would that replace the word map, or would it just go alongside it?
It will replace the word map.
Yeah, okay. Right, so thank you. I suppose the other thing, in the introduction to the plan, I-29, I think that's the one that talks about strategic and non-strategic policies. I just wondered whether that needs to be modified to just set out what you basically described, just to make it clear which the policies are in. No, well, we'll see what others can.
Yes, we can certainly do
Yeah.
recommendation.
Yeah. Okay, anything you want? So we're clear what I've summarised is your position. Yeah. So that's what we're fine. Anything from this side? I think that quite a few people, in terms of the diagram and the site maps, I think that probably goes with quite what people would agree with on that. Does that?
Yeah, exactly. I just want to say really welcome the changes that have been made. We've had a lot of discussions around the maps.
Yeah.
And it's been explained to us that they were intended to be applied indicatively, so I think having that clarification in the plan if you're coming to the question is really helpful.
Okay. Right. Okay. Well, we can talk about each map diagram as we go through the sites if we need to, in terms of what it shows and to the extent it's justified. But I think that qualification is helpful because it gives a visual presentation of what's set out in detail in the policy. So it shows a way of achieving what illustrating what's proposed for the sites. Okay. Anything else about that issue? Anybody wishes to say? No. Right, the next one is about the information requirements for planning applications. The NPPF say that local planning authorities should publish a list of their information requirements for applications for planning permission. These requirements should be kept to the minimum needed to make decisions. It should be reviewed at least every 2 years. And you should only request support information for necessary materials to application in question. The various policies of the plan refer to various things, assessments, strategies, evidence, blah, blah. And I asked you, and you you responded by identifying all the policies in the plan that refer to these things, and there were about 60 different items in total. You said that, well, actually, maybe 60 preferences, but quite a few of them could be part of other documents that NPF and are established, like sustainable transport statements on systems, etc. So basically, what you're saying is, well, it's not as onerous as it may appear when you're talking about 60 different things. So I think that's council's position with this. You also said, going back to our start, does the council publish a list of information requirements for other operations? And you update that as a thing again. So that now would be amended to reflect what the plan does. Maybe the things that are more procedural or something.
There'll be procedural things, and also there'll be reflecting on the requirements in the policy that will be taken into that list as well, so that we can speak to each other. Also, the requirements that we put in the plan is clearly, it's not, it's sort of flexible in the plan, so that can also be updated based on updated evidence and things like that. So it's more of an integration rather than duplication. So we see it as, the plan would have more weight to it by these requirements. As part of the local plan process now, we require these things anyway. We put it in the policy again to kind of have that robust evidence. And then the validation list will kind of have that more detailed guidance as to, this is what's required from this policy, this is how we can do it in the planning statement, this is how we can do it in the design access statement, that level of detail. So again, it's not duplication, it's just integration.
So you're saying that we can go, as we go through the policies, we'll talk about things if we need to. But so you're saying that the way they're expressed in the plan is sufficiently flexible that it won't get out of date, because the way it be required could be modified as you review it. So it talks about an energy statement. It's a very broad thing, and that your foundation list may next year explain about this, the year after. Well, actually, so that's the kind of.
That's the kind of. It's almost like a guidance.
Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. So if bearing that in mind, we can think about the way these are expressed as we go through the policies through the circumstances. I understand the principle of what you're doing. Anything on this side? Any comments that people wish to make on that? So William, again?
Yeah, sorry. I mean, you've already picked up on the framework guidance, and for that reason, we've already set out in our hearing statement that we think having all of those information requirements in the plan does actually jar with the framework guidance about taking a proportionate approach. It's unclear, and I appreciate you just explaining the council's position, but I think it's quite unclear how it sits alongside the validation checklist. I don't think we share the view that policies are written flexibly enough for those requirements to be updated. They're quite specific and prescriptive in their requirements for specific documents, and so if that requirement changes, there's no mechanism for that to be reflected in the local plan. And that's the role of a validation checklist, which is required to be updated every 2 years. So I think generally we feel having all of these information requirements in planning is not proportionate, it's duplicative, it's quite unmanageable, it's cost to developers, it places resource burden on the local authority themselves. And there are lots of items that are sought that are covered. A requirement for a social value impact assessment, for example, is something that we think could be picked up already by the environmental impact assessment regulation and process. So to us, it feels incredibly, not that approach.
I think that's what they're saying as well, in a way, that yes, it would be picked up by some of the process, so they could list these anyway in evaluation, so that's even if it wasn't in the plan.
Right, but I don't think the policies are drafted flexibly enough to explain that.
Yeah.
That's probably the crux. And our comments have not not necessarily sought to do away with the requirements, but to sort of soften the wording so that it's not saying you must submit a strategy. It's about seeking to secure what that strategy is.
Yeah.
To secure that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. So more to focus the policy on the outcome rather than the process.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, okay, understood. I won't lose on this today, because I think it will be interesting. We can talk about it in relation to specific policies and requirements as we go through them. You want to say anything? You don't know. Right, anything further? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, just coming in late.
Yeah, that's good.
It's not a policy point. I think it's more the plea. I mean, current planning applications in London, strategic applications of the size, which would take over 2 years to get through the machine. That's 2 years from submission to determination. Part of that challenge is the amount of information that goes into a planning application. And the second thing, I'm sure that's my sport, is exhausting council to review all that information. So I think developers are quite happy. We'd be happy to provide that information. It's the consequence of that upon process, I think. So I'm not advocating a technical policy, but just some pragmatism in how we do this. And also, from our experience on a lot of applications recently, the general public cannot decipher a very detailed planning application. And it's the sheer volume of weight of that application that's problematic. And so I do think, even at policy stages, we need to take that into account, because the system can become complicated, not necessarily to the professionals, but to the general public who are trying to get through these very large submissions. So I think I agree with the we just need to be pragmatic and proportionate. I think we're happy to accept that planning comes with a range of disciplines. It's right that we respond to those disciplines. But it's also a source of delay, confusion, and it doesn't really engage with the general public. It makes it very hard to engage. So it's more of a plea on that side of things, I think, more than anything else.
Okay, well, yeah. I mean, in terms of general, it's interesting because obviously it does make it a requirement to applicants, but it does also, you know, your developmental colleagues have a lot of information on a whole range of things. But that's what's needed to ensure the quality of the development. And that, yeah.
Sorry, sir, I wasn't going to say anything, but
Do you want to just use the mic?
thank you, sir. I wasn't going to say anything. I thought I just wanted to support, I think, some of the observations by the other two participants. We can't answer your question about whether it's there. We can only do that when we look at individual policies. But I wanted to flag the point that there do seem to be a couple of things required in policies, which is that the council's taking a very belt and braces approach, and it's trying to resolve issues which previously weren't really land use planning matters, but have become so more recently. And I'm thinking about, say, spatial strategy BFN 1, Part 7, expects house builders to support improvements to boroughs, strategic and utilities infrastructure, social value, health impact assessment, as the other participant mentioned, and then we'll come on to the question about water. And I've seen the statement on the ground with Thames Water, but HBF is concerned that we're seeing the incremental growth of land having to be used to resolve lots of other flaws into something. And I think that is leading to bloated validation lists, which does give rise to the problem of which the participants for that referred to, which is that typically it now takes schemes actually just get through planning. But that doesn't answer your question about whether it's sound or not.
No, yeah, no, thank you. It's a general point. I mean, it's interesting. It's important to understand the context, which is what we're doing today. But the approach. But we will go through the policies as we come through the different matters.
Sorry, just one final point to make as well on the cost of these application requirements is we're not just burning the cost ourselves of our own reports, but we're often picking up the cost of the council's review of the corresponding as well. So it's the cumulative impact, which we'll come on to, sure, part of the session.
Okay. Yeah, so, yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, anything?
Yeah, just to basically say some of the requirements are from consultation with statutory bodies. So the planning application comes in, you will consult a statutory body and we would recommend that the council requires these things. And hence the reason why we put in the sort of clarity and certainty, and also to give it a bit more weight, because it's actually dealing with issues that really issues in the borough and really priorities and things like that.
But following on from what Mr. Stevens said, is it essential for you as planning authority to have that, or are you doing a job for the statutory consultee? By getting stuff from the applicant to help them do what they should be doing.
We think it's essential in order to deliver the policies, especially the strategic policies. Because if you think of it, from drafting to actually how it could be delivered, and you kind of go through that process and realize what the requirements are needed in order to deliver it, and in order to kind of have that certainty of delivery.
But you should be assuming that the statutory consultees are doing what they should be doing, not having to. Anyway, I think, we'll come back to it. Anything further from your side on this? So we'll move on to the integrated assessment, which we already mentioned. One of the things that does inequalities, sustainability appraisal, does the statutory, which the sustainability appraisal is obviously a national policy requirement. The impact assessment is a statutory regulation, obviously. So the IAA does a number of things. It also refers to the HRA, I think. Yeah, the integrated assessment. HRA. Well, the HRA is actually. Is that right, or is it? Does it mean it kind of refers to and out of the HRA?
Yes, it was a joint work on done coordinate.
So it isn't the IA doesn't actually contain the HRA, does it? No. It's a separate document. I've got a question about that. Okay. Does it do the health impact assessment? Does the equality impact assessment? Does it health impact assessment?
Yes, there's a HIA
in the IA. So it does many things. Okay. I don't really want to get into the IA. Obviously, there are the SCA regulations that have applied with, and I think I asked you a question about that and dealt with that. One of the things that those regulations require is for the council to identify and appraise reasonable alternatives to the plan. That is done. That requirement is done high level. It's interpreted in different ways. There have been court cases about what are reasonable alternatives and what should have been reasonable alternatives. But it's done differently, and it does depend on the plan and the context and all these things. But you're satisfied, and the IA does contain a number of reasonable alternatives that were identified and appraised. Anything you want to say in relation to that?
No, not beyond the quite comprehensive approach and considering alternative policies and sites.
Yeah.
And quite a comprehensive approach. And this is all set out extensive detail in the appendices.
Anything from the side on the IAA, reasonable alternatives, etc.? No? Okay, thank you. Which brings me on to the habitat regulations assessment. So the only protected site I think that was identified as being potentially impacted was the Epic Forest SAC. Yeah, correct. Right, which is outside the borough, some distance away, but there were potential impacts identified, so therefore an appropriate assessment was undertaken. And in particular, so that was undertaken. That included the adverse impact subject to mitigation to the plan. Then there was some further work as a result of changing evidence on natural England.
Natural England raised some queries about air quality and
Yes.
and some work that our consultant WSP did to basically demonstrate that there potentially could be impact. And we produced an air quality information report that basically follows HRA and WSP's work, comparing against other forest-related air quality reports through other local plan examinations to basically support the conclusion that it's a impact on the forest act. Natural and the reverse and special politics.
So there was an update to the HRA, that was SD9, that's where the WSP looked at the traffic generation again, and they'd overestimated in the original assessment.
It's quite complex.
Yeah.
A pragmatic approach that we could have undertaken.
Yeah.
Highway modelling to
Yeah. It was specifically associated with Stratford and Maryland allocations in that development there, and that's because of where that is in relation to distance to the road network going past the forest.
Exactly, it's the certain kilometres from the forest act, basically. As I'm sure you're aware, the vast majority of the development we're going to see is from the rural blocks and from the lower corridor. So therefore, the really large sites that we have impact on the forest act are in that Stratford area.
And there was an issue about the car-free nature of most of the development as well, presumably.
Yeah, I mean, both our existing policy, our future policy presumes car-free development for residential use with disabled badges, blue badges, and therefore it's one of the many reasons in terms of mitigating why we actually think the numbers were overestimated.
Yeah, okay. But notwithstanding all that, the HRA does require or identify that mitigations are needed, correct, some of which are implicit in the Paris policies anyway about the car-free and restricted parking, everything. But one of the things, so that we talk about air quality, and that's not cars, but recreational pressure, that's from living influence, increasing population growth, etc. So the mitigations that are referred to there are the SANS and the SANG, yeah? And then GWS3 is the key tool for that.
Correct.
Yeah, so we can come on to that when we deal with that. Going back to the relevant allocations, so if I look at the ones in Stratford and Maryland, we may need to come back to this. But I suppose the question is, do those allocations need to, in order to comply with GWS3, SANS and SANG, do they need to require anything on site?
I have to defer to my colleague
Because
knows about this in particular, I guess, but in the existing local plan, we already have a contribution towards the SANs and SANs. The kind of work that has been done in collaboration with the other programs.
So wouldn't the SANG, the suitable alternative green space? So that wouldn't necessarily have to be on the site. That could be way through a branch contribution, is that right?
Correct.
Well, maybe we'll come back to that. Yeah, there's not really. So because, for example, if I took N8 SA1 allocation, open space requirement on the site, and it refers to a pocket park, community growing. There's not much SANG in that, I wouldn't have thought, as an alternative to active forests. So, well, can we just bear that in mind when we come back to GWS3 and the relevant allocations, whether there is, or do you want to just briefly explain how
Sure.
where would the SANG be?
Yeah, sure. So it's we devised another strategy essentially, which is set out within the statement of Natural England, and that strategy sets out other offsetting measures, so SANG essentially, but in London they're not the same as SANG to other parts of the country. But Natural England satisfied that financial contributions to those areas that would be improved would offset the impact of active forest. So it's other areas that you're encouraging people to go to as opposed to visiting active forest. and that is set out within the statement of grants. We agreed with them. That work was in progress as we were going along, so that's why there's a lot of information that we suggested to make reference to that document. That's a separate.
And that's in GWS3, so we'll come on to that. Yeah. So there are opportunities in Newham to improve green space, but it's existing green space that you would get a financial contribution from the developers of N8, SA1 or whatever else, and that would help them. That's okay. Right, understood. So the bottom line is that curriculum is they agree that the plan, as subject to modification, there will be no adverse impact on the fine. Oh, yeah, sorry. The housing requirements, the housing capacity figures in the plan, pro formas, capacities, etc. The numbers will have changed. They relate to a different time period, plans are modified, and capacities. The capacity of the site allocations has broadly gone up, hasn't it? I think, hasn't it?
I think it's fair to say that the capacities are broadly the same. For those sites where there's an extended plan period,
Right.
where some sites that are delivering beyond the plan period, they get extra capacity down within the plan period if we were to extend.
But haven't some of the upper range figures, is that, anyway, no, sorry, it doesn't really matter. The point is, I suppose, if the numbers for the amount of development in the plan change, the HRA will need to look at it again. And it may be that, well, actually, the trip generation is, it's not material, but it is something that will need to be done. Correct. Yeah, okay, fine. Right, okay. Anything on the HRA? No, okay. So that brings us to 10:50. So it's a good time to have a break, and we will come back at 10 past 11 to talk about liability. Okay, thank you.
I think basically, I was worried that if that's when that closed down, it stopped the building.
Not a copy or anything. Yeah, okay. Thanks. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I saw that. So, do I just go back and say we'll try and make some changes? The only other thing we want to do is try and get that middle point.
I'm actually finding it okay, but there are moments where it's slightly muffled.
I think that's the bottom. I don't know.
When they're not facing
I think maybe we have much to tell people.
Right, well, let me go and talk to the inspector and see if he can ask them to. I feel like there's a bit of rustling background noise as well, though. So I don't know whether we can adjust it. I do wonder if
Yeah, it was further down. Yeah, it's further into the middle of the group. We might have to ask take to do it further. If we just let everyone know that the wires
it's not. I don't know if it's it though, because it's the inspector.
It's it.
He's the one that's more subtle to me sometimes.
I think maybe we do say it might
Yeah, we can see if if we just ask him to ask everyone to speak clearly to the mic.
Yeah,
we'll see if
I noticed James was talking. He was quite quiet, but I think when they yes,
I do. It's not the quietness. It's just every now and then it just cuts out. as in it goes a bit muffled, people's voices go a bit muffled.
Okay.
Let's get someone else to sit outside the room. That's what I think. Because I've listened.
I might do that.
This is why I've had my headphones.
Right, I see. I might do that then, because I'm not talking.
Just keep an eye on it, because
How long is that break? So is it 10 minutes?
Yeah, so tree cover. Yeah, so intro. So is it from the one that's from the checked? So it'll be updated. Oh, okay, right. If it hasn't expired. It's a better than clear. Yeah, it's just that I'll make sure that check. And then I'll double check. I just think because it keeps changing. Yeah. It's a lovely case. Just like, yes, it would be appreciated.
So he asked how we are going to monitor in terms of quality. It's like challenges. Okay. Oh yeah. I wasn't sure very quick to send those.
Yeah. So let's stick to that.
Yeah.
So just do it tomorrow. Yeah, so anything. Let's just stick to that.
This is yes. Yes. What Marissa was doing previously at work alongside.
I just didn't have the reference because my notes were with assumption. Right. It's left. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. Yeah. So he's made his way. Yeah, no, I know. That's why.
Oh right, yes. I put together even on the I'm not such a different only got 6 months left, so well, yes, 70 years old, it's time to go. I don't know.
Are you 19?
1955. We wouldn't really be older than my colleagues.
I'm not a big fan.
Much topics.
Nice fish and chips.
That's such a lot to go to.
Yeah, it's just true. Yeah. We're about 20 minutes from exit. I think it was why last day.
What I'm going to do is I was waiting for Sarah. She said she comes out there.
Yeah.
Stays around. So we come off. By that time.
Yeah.
Do you want to take it?
Well, I think we can just add Sue to our team channel. We've got a contact channel with her assessment. And she's working on that. So I think I'm sorry, there wasn't a bit more to do, but I think the teacher will just say, it's on standby, because you've also got what your laptop.
No, the thing is that I cycle. And I can, so there wasn't actually. I'm doing next year as well, so if you want to do it,
Well,
yeah, we can have you into the team channel for the day. Yeah, that might be better.
I'm wasting
3
hours.
I think the thing is we weren't sure how it's been a bit of an experiment, so I think we'll be on standby.
Yeah, well, I'll come on next year.
Yeah.
it was quite it got taken
Yeah, I think at times he was talking away from so he's going to do an announcement outside of his more because I think somebody I think that Hal's been listening, he's got this phone. He said when he was expecting to stop, I got the answer, it was a bit quiet.
The thing is, I mean, you do it privately, it doesn't need to work. From a legal perspective, which is why I've said but anyway, I thought you were trying to
Yeah. Is it a case of you can't hear it?
No. What we've talked, Roy's talked to the inspector. The inspector's going to speak more clearly. like, and he's going, why don't we be able to do the same? No, we think that's it, or, I'll keep listening to it. I put it in my head, yeah.
So I think it's great. So, yeah, Ricky said it's goes right. I think it's been the very order because I've done mine.
Yeah, I said you're right. Second come round.
Oh, yeah, no, I
We found it, yeah.
24
Mine is giving signature. Yeah, it's really hit that. That's that's very nice. Yeah, I like that.
How's your non-office work?
Yeah, it's a lot. So it's been a lot. I'm trying to keep it so yeah, she's okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you can do that because
We'll see where he is.
that's how you do it.
I got to
Just do it.
really.
That's the market.
It's just because it's
You can, yeah, I think he needs to speak into it. Links. I think you can tell what he. So you speak right there quite loud.
Yeah, maybe it's the way he angled it, like closer to his like mouth angle. Right shoulder.
I mean, maybe when we want to
I know you're different height. But when you
yeah.
it's too close. I mean, it's more like it needs to be up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's too close. Testing. Testing. Yeah. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I think so.
He went, I went in.
Yes, so the local planning was.
All right.
So I'm basically sent out
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that's yeah, okay. So
I know. I saw him a few weeks ago.
yeah, I'll do it. I'll bring
Yeah.
Which order? Let me see what's going on. Otherwise, just ask him.
yeah.
I'm currently to respond to
it's like 20
Yeah.
years later.
Also, in timestamp, it's something that I said there was a point. So they and also, yeah, the topics has already been no. And then,
Yes.
just go back. Maybe just write out any else it should be fairly obvious by the yeah.
Yeah, I did.
I wasn't going to go forwards. Yeah. Sorry. Is that
Oh, yeah.
Okay, it is 7 o'clock, so we will resume now, please. So we're on to, we detected there were some problems with the YouTube broadcasts being what we were saying. So having said earlier on that microphone in the middle picks up the sound for the YouTube, but the mics that we're using to amplify our voice that goes into that microphone that goes to YouTube, I think. So it is important to make sure you're speaking up into a microphone as loud as possible. That's what it is. So, because we have had some people who are watching it at the same time all the time. So please, if we can, try and use the microphones and speak up as much as possible. Even though we can hear in the room, it may be people online find it difficult. Right, okay. So we're going to move on now to the item on the agenda, which is in two parts: liability evidence and the liability findings. So we'll go through the evidence first, and then we'll have the evidence we do have what indicates to us for the liability allocations in particular, which we will then revisit as we go through the allocations during the course of this next. So, as I'm sure you're all know, local plans should be informed by a proportionate assessment of liability. The assessment should demonstrate the total cumulative costs of the policy not undermine deliverability. So that's basic essence of what we're looking at. So, my first issue is, has the council got a proportionate assessment of liability? Second one will be, what does it tell us about the cumulative costs of the deliverability of the plan? So there are always different ways you can do a viability assessment. There is quite prescriptive PPG and RCIS guidance, which I'm sure was followed in this case. Now is the landmark approach, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I'm going to go through the evidence, some of the criticisms of it by Ballymore and St William in particular. But bearing in mind that the test is not whether a different view of liability in terms of the inputs and assumptions have been taken, because clearly is the case. It could be different assumptions made. The question is the one that the council proportionate and adequate based on reasonable evidence. There will be alternatives, and we'll hear about some alternatives, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the approach that the council took is not justified in this project. With that in mind, we will go through some of the detailed assumptions made and explore whether they are justified. And the overview, I think, is, and maybe I'll get this to give a kind of just a very high level view of the extent to which a kind of, I know there are lots of scenarios, but I suppose the extent to which it was a cautious approach, an optimistic approach, I'm going to go through some specific questions in there. Do you want to give that overview to start with?
Yeah, so as you've rightly said, sir, the planning practice guidance does set down some broad guidelines as to how the plan testing should be undertaken. So it's a series of procedural patterns. I've used methodologies that reflect the types of scheme that come forward in an area, or actual sites if they are particularly important for delivering the scale of housing identified in the plan. In this final assessment, we have been provided with a series of site allocations by the council with various housing mixes to test the impact of housing mix policies. All of those schemes are tested with the full impact of the policy requirements, so the most important being affordable housing as a starting point, and that's been tested, as you would have seen, everywhere between 0% and 60% in 5% increments. Yes, clearly there is the overarching target for affordable in the draft plan, but the plan applies the policy flexibly, so therefore it's important to understand that, as we had having testing, that some schemes won't be able to meet the full target at this point in the plan period. Some schemes that come forward later may be able to deliver more affordable housing later on than they are today, based on today's market conditions. And if values and costs move over time, there is potential that those schemes will deliver more than they do today.
I don't want to talk about the model housing policy today. We're going to come on to that. Right. We will talk about what your work shows in terms of the implications of the 60% and the 35%, which you have proposed. We'll come back to the but going back to just that sort of, so you did this work in 2024. It reflects allocations. It raises some assumptions about costs and values. The approaches you do it at a point in time, and that point in time was 24 that you use, and you use the data sources, etc.
Yeah, that's correct. So it was actually an iterative process. So there was testing done in 2022, so that updated in 2024 as the plan was developed. So the viability work informed the plan and also responded to the plan as it was emerging. In terms of data sources, the PPG identifies that you have to have regard to evidence of sales values from residential schemes, evidence of rents and capital values with commercial development, and then you have to have regard to costs. And that should be informed by the BCIS database, which is, as well known, a collection of tender prices prepared by the BCIS, by the RICS, based on tenders for live developments, and there is debate about the extent to which BCIS reflects actual costs, and clearly on a scheme-by-scheme basis, depending on what's being built and what the constraints on particular sites are, there will be variations between BCIS and costs on actual sites, and clearly when an application is submitted, it will be based on its own individual costs rather than BCIS through a cost estimate. And then beyond that, we've made allowances for professional fees, marketing, sales costs, disposal costs, infrastructure costs, Section 106 and still, biodiversity net gain, and all other profits, including profits to the developer. That results in a residual or a series of residual land values that we then compare to
three benchmark land values to reflect the types of sites that Newham typically sees coming forward. So secondary offices, secondary industrial, and then undeveloped sites, and there's two. So if the residual land value is higher than the benchmark, then it can bear the full weight of policy requirements, generate a return to the landowner and to the developer, and would come forward.
Okay. And in terms of the sort of degree to which you follow the PPG and you've used data sources referred to, etc. And obviously you've taken what you consider a proportionate approach. So is it a balanced approach, or is it a cautious approach, or is it just relevant data you weren't taking it from a particular angle?
No, I mean, what we do is that we collect all of the land registry sales over a period of time, and then we identify how values differ between different parts of the borough. That's an entirely neutral approach. It is what it is. It's based on the evidence. BCIS data, again, it is what it is. The other side will criticise it. I acknowledge there are flaws in that data to a degree. And until the scheme is designed and it comes forward, you won't know what the absolute cost will be, and that's why the plan deals with that at the application stage rather than at the plan stage. If we were dealing with, if we were in a district council where all of the sites are homogeneous greenfield developments, it would be far more straightforward to say costs are X pound per square foot, because you're dealing with houses and they're predominantly going to be pretty much the same. Whereas here, you've got a huge range of development types, ranging from low-rise flats to things going up to 20, 30 stories, with various constraints. So to try and second guess what a scheme will be in advance of it being designed is very difficult. And that's why the use of average BCIS is appropriate in this particular case.
What we'll do is I picked out some of the specific things that have been challenged on the other side. I'm going to go through them. Just to go through it as a list that I picked up. And if I've mischaracterised it or I've missed something, you can come back when you've heard. So I'm going to do it like that rather than having too much to it. So just in terms of you referred to most significant policy effect on the viability is the extent of affordable housing provision. That's the biggest variable. Yeah? I think that's one of the things that Sir William said is clearly most significant impact. You picked out some others, what most significant, William, which were the affordable mix, the city mix, the housing mix, education contributions, employment and training contributions. If there are others, but would you agree with that broadly as being the ones that are most significant?
I would certainly agree that the affordable housing is the most significant. Housing mix, less so because the borough has been applying similar mix in developments for the last 6 years at least, in the current plan. So developers are providing that mix already, so it's not a new requirement. Tenure mix, yes, tenure mix to a degree of the affordable does have an impact. If there's more intermediate and less social, then the RP would pay more for the affordable housing than would be the case if they were delivering more social oriented. But that reflects the council's priority on the mix and what the need is in the borough, and they accept that that has a bearing on viability, and therefore there might be a trade-off between tenure mix and the overall percentage, but that's reflected in flexibility in the plan. Employment and training contributions, they have a bearing, but far less important in the quantum of impact than affordable.
Okay. In terms of employment and training, HBF seemed to suggest couldn't see where it included. I think the answer may be including the baseline, is it right?
Yeah, correct.
In the paragraph 660, it refers to the baseline RLV, including various things, including employment. Why is that? Is that because it's a recording previous stuff?
It was something that because the impact is referenced
small. It wasn't something that we tested by itself in the cumulative testing. So it's baked into the testing as a baseline cost, like biodiversity net gain or any other cost.
Okay. Well, in terms of the policy requirements, I'm not going to talk about that today, whether that's justified. We'll come on to that when we come to the relevant policy. But the fact is, it's included in there in a costed way. And you can find the costs can be identified in your work.
Yeah.
It's there somewhere. Okay. Right. So let me just go through some of the things. One of them is the change in build costs since you did the work. Build costs has gone up since you've done it, and therefore, I suppose the implication is that it's out of date, it should be updated. Do you respond to that?
Well, this is often a point raised, and you think, well, how far do you have to go in a proportionate testing of a plan? Do you do it the day before the examination? Do you do it the day before the plan is adopted? Viability, it is a point in time exercise. And the key word is proportionate, and I think the PPP accepts that viability is done at a point in time and can't continually update and still retain a proportionate approach. But in terms of build costs, if you look at the trajectory of BCIS tender price index, it has tailed off in terms of its rate of inflation. So it was up to 2023 that there was a steep increase in build costs. Since then, the rate of inflation has normalised to around 2 or 3%. So compared to what was done in 2024, there's not a significant impact in terms of the overall cost increase.
And build costs and sales values and rent values will change over the period, clearly. But important, you can't just change one bit. If you're going to do it again,
yes,
to an update, because both variables will change.
Indeed.
So,
yeah.
So it's the important as well starting with, I think, a proportionate approach. Okay, I'll bring you in when I've been through that. So the next one I got on here was section 106 for the building safety levy, not factored in.
Yeah, I know that that's not factored in, and this is a point in time issue. So at the time the work was done, the building safety levy was something that was being consulted on, but the government hadn't at that point published any rates. They were only published earlier this year. Having said that, in terms of their impact, I think Newham's rates are developed around £30 per square metre. It's about half of the narrow sill rate for Newham, so it's relatively modest overall impact. Will typically be about 1.5% of build costs. So we could have run all these again at great expense to the council, but it wouldn't have demonstrably altered the outcome.
Okay. Yeah. Finance. You assume 6.5%.
Yeah, I don't recognise 8 from any sensible viability appraisals that we see. So we typically see 7% as a broad maximum. There are some small consultancies who will try and buy more, but generally speaking, main consultancies are 7%. But we're looking over the plan period. Interest rates are coming down. And then if you look back to where development finance was before 2008, typically when the bank rate was 5%, development finance rates were around 6.5%. So we're reflecting a return to medium-term conditions. Obviously, if things come forward today, so if an applicant wants to submit today and they're a higher interest cost than 6.5, they can reflect that in their viability assessment. So it's a bit like BCIS. There is an average cost. There's also an average finance cost. If there are particular schemes that have higher finance costs, they can be reflected in the viability assessment. Newham isn't saying that FPAs be capped to 6.5%.
Yeah, but the point is, unlike liability means trying to avoid site-specific liability assessments. So, it's you try to make this as robust as you can at this level to avoid that scenario. For the reasons we'll come on to.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, sir, because London is so complex, the MPPF ambition that you test everything to plan doesn't really work in the London context. It's being raised elsewhere by your colleagues in London. And it's generally accepted that because London is such a complex area to develop in, you can't test everything in advance when coming forward because you won't know the precise form of development, the quantum, the mix, what's in the ground, all the other various factors that come into play when dealing with complex development.
Okay, well, we'll come on to the approach of private liability versus site-specific liability when we go to we'll touch on it. And because obviously you've got a London plan approach to that, fast-track approach, and etc. So that reflects that, I think. Okay, so marketing 2.5%. As I said, should be higher. 3 to 5. 3.5 to 4.
What we're trying to reflect is an average. So some schemes may require higher than 3%, but it's very rare for one to be higher than 3%.
So 2.5 is an average from your point of view. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Developer profit 17.5.
Again, FPAs are typically run with a profit of 17.5%, 6 on the affordable, and 15 on the commercial.
There's reference to the SPG talking about 17.5 to 20. Recognise that?
It does, and obviously the planning practice guidance on liability has a range as well of 15 to 20%. And the PPG recognises that some forms of housing may have lower profits or higher. 13.5% reflects the typical rate applied when the schemes are tested.
And it falls in the middle of the PPG range.
Yeah.
Understood, thank you. Abnormals, which is no allowance, is that right?
Yeah. What the PPG says about abnormal costs is that they should be reflected in the benchmark land value. And that can be somewhat problematic if you've got a building because you can't necessarily take someone who owns a secondary industrial site. Well, you need to reflect it's in the ground in the price we pay. But nevertheless, it does say that they do reflect in the benchmark land value. This comes back to the point around what happens at the application stage versus what can be done in the pilot testing. And because it's impossible, unless the council goes through every single site in the testing, we've done intrusive ground surveys, extensive work on what's in the ground and what would be required to decontaminate them or whatever else they need to do. They won't be able to tell what an accurate abnormal cost would be. So the approach taken here, which is entirely consistent with every other borough and local plan viability assessment, is that there is no cost for abnormal costs, but clearly when sites come forward at an application stage, they can reflect those costs if they do occur.
Two things with that. You talked elsewhere about taking an average assumption. You could have picked examples of abnormals. Presumably they're quite common in development sites.
Well,
or is it abnormal?
Sometimes they have some, other times they don't. It entirely depends on what the site's been used for historically. So many sites we look at, they don't have any abnormal costs at all. So what would the impact of that would be if we were to take an average? We would be burdening the sites that don't have any abnormal costs with the costs that would never incur. So that you would never be able to demonstrate that those sites could deliver an affordable housing vision that could principle when those schemes are developed. Because those costs would never in reality occur.
Okay, well,
And it goes back to the flexibility. So the affordable housing policy, it does reflect the approach of having a viability tested route to enable developers that do have economic costs to still bring those sites forward and the costs that will occur.
the way the PPG talks about the relationship between plan viability assessment and site-specific planning application should demonstrate what the assumptions in the local plan assessment that are wrong, incorrect. So it's clear that you've got to go abnormal, and then site-specific abnormals are X million or whatever. That's an example of the way you explicitly demonstrate the difference between what your values are and what yours.
Absolutely. I mean, the idea that you take the plan inputs and then you say why they're wrong, it only works for a short period of time in any case. Things get out of date very quickly. So,
but on that clear one, it's clear that the abnormals is an issue that is marked in effect.
yeah. So if you were to seek to justify why there was a need for this at the application stage for a particular scheme, that would be one reason.
A clear reason.
A clear reason to justify it.
Okay. The extent to which individual projects have been assessed, you have taken the mix as proposed on the sites, but it's still at a level that is general assumptions for the reasons you've said. Yeah.
Yeah. So the council has identified a broad capacity for each of the sites and has it mixed. And that's what the testing is based on. Clearly, when the application comes forward, whether or not that precise quantity of development more or less is developed will depend on site-specific factors when the scheme comes forward.
Yeah.
But it is a broad assessment of capacity.
But it's not drilled down below the generalised assumption. So you haven't got site-specific infrastructure costs from that site. It's the ones you use generally.
There are some infrastructure costs that are spoken to different sites.
There are. Yeah. Okay. How do you do that? When you're a clear policy required.
Again, they were calculated by the council.
Okay. So it does go beyond a generalised. So there is some site-specific.
Yeah,
amendments done.
Yeah, insofar as the council can at this point,
Yeah.
they've made some estimates of extra requirements. That's largely based on the idea.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay. So that's gone through my list of the ones picked out from this side. I'm going to, unless there's anything else you want to say at this stage, I'll hand over to. I'll start. Sorry, since you've got the microphone. I'm sorry.
So it's very difficult to look at this and not to talk about some policies. Right?
Is your microphone on? Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, just put it a little bit closer.
Yes, sir. I think it's very difficult to consider this and not look at affordable housing policies, partly because that's probably where this is profoundly clear. So I do apologise for referencing that. I think our position over see there's one extra point I think I'll just add to you on this.
Okay.
But we would say there is a concern that's been emphasised that they're not based, or the figures are not based on current and up-to-date data. That is a concern given where we sit, and given that only last week, the London Mayor set out their emergency measures in the draft LPG, which sort of gives us a state of play across London. But yet here we are in the borough which is proposing 60% affordable housing threshold. And we're starting from that. Now, that boils down to a couple of things. One, we say that there is an underestimating of cost of development, and there is an optimistic, not unreasonable, but an optimistic position of value. And those sort of sit apart. And what that does, in our view, is it gives an unrealistic position of viability of development in Europe. And that, to say, when we proudly set out 60% threshold. Where does that take us? You've raised a couple of concerns, I think there's a couple of points just to raise for to add on to that. Benchmark land value.
Yes,
you did mention that.
no, I didn't. You're right. It was on my next slide.
That's based on 2019 data. Predates COVID, it predates the war in Russia and Ukraine. Two things which had a very profound effect on industrial land values, particularly in this particular area. There's no indexation, there's no bringing that up to date as far as we can read or see. As I said, sales values are at the more optimistic end of the spectrum. So I think they're around about 760 pounds square foot in those lines. That's not unreasonable, but we'll say the BCIS data and the way that that's been built in, the cost doesn't reflect the value. So basically, if you're developing at the higher end of the cost value spectrum, the idea is that incurs additional cost premium to ensure that you can sell those units at the value that you prescribed. That's probably proportionate. Talks about infrastructure costs. I'm always taken by the fact that we speak to them that pretty much every of the large scale sites have infrastructure issues. They have contaminated land issues, so large ex-industrial land. That we can't see if we've properly captured in this. So the previous financial viability assessments help demonstrate what some of those costs could be on the sites. Realise that they're very site specific in terms of some form of, I suppose, pro-rated position or some sort of average. Then, as you suggested, I can't see why that can't be taken in. And that is a really important factor in delivery upfront costs. Finance costs, I mean, I'm afraid we simply don't agree that 6.5% is representative, and nor will it be representative over the plan period. 7%, I think we disagree with, not to me on that one, but I think we accept 7% as something which was at least proportionate. The 6.5% is just not recognised in the industry at the moment. And indeed, across other viability consultants wouldn't recognise that as a position. We realise, I think there's also a bit of growth relied upon within the appraisals, and we understand the need to look forward. We need that, but growth is inherently risky, it's inherently unpredictable at the moment. Any growth analysis done really just doesn't bear survival with the future at the moment. So you see that as a problem there as well. And I think I suggest that we do know how the building safety levy is coming in. We do know that it's coming in next year. And I would agree that on larger sites that the amounts we talked about aren't significant. I think also if you weigh that up with one of what you raised about the employment contributions, those can be substantial. They're based on, at the moment, a calculation of the number of work crew employees on site during construction over a long period of time. And the numbers that can come out on some schemes recently have been around in the tens of millions, or certainly over 10 million. If you add on top of that, potentially significant cost of the safety net, that is quite a sum of money. Not one that should be sort of dismissed lightly, I would say. And then I said before, I think there's just a couple of things I'll finish on. I mean, this sits against a William report that's recently out, which identifies that pretty much London is not delivering housing. 3,000, I think it was, just over 3,000 homes the first 3 quarters of the year against the New London, what will be the New London plan target, which will be 66,000, 28,000 the whole time. And we also see the special measures coming out of the GLA, and these can't be dismissed lightly. It's a very significant and difficult time. And I would say, I'm going to cross over slightly into probably a topic I come up with, which is to do with affordable housing, but the idea of a 60% threshold misunderstands the purpose of the threshold approach to the plan. It was put in place to incentivise developers to achieve at that point 35% affordable housing. So if you were 30% or below, the idea was to achieve that on the basis that you could avoid late stage reviews. Developers do not like late stage reviews because they create uncertainty and they generate risk. The whole purpose of that was to have a target which could be achieved. And we say that the 60% threshold is just simply not achievable. As far as we're aware, and having monitored a few schemes, I'm sure colleagues to my right of me who are developing 2 schemes, probably there is not a scheme going forward in Europe which is anywhere close to 60%. forecasting at the moment. It's a state region. Even then, I would question what they're doing. So at the moment, you have current consistent at about 10% housing. So all I'm saying is, in reality, if Dr. Lee is correct, where we see 10% affordable housing, that just simply doesn't bear resemblance to the figures. That's all.
Yeah, okay. When you say that growth is factored into the assumption, what do you mean?
We understand there's a bit of forward and optimism in terms of growth, in terms of values, and also in terms of jobs. And whilst the snapshots are, we see some growth being built in some of the assumptions to improve the outlook as you go forward. We recognise that it's we accept that. We saw some growth. Part of it, because I'm not the viability expert, I'm relaying the message, but we saw growth being applied in some of the assumptions going forward.
Okay. I'll still in response to that. The way he characterised it, it was the build cost, for example, were a point in time based on the BCAS. They were averaging it wasn't change. Okay, understood. So the bottom line of all that is, for a variety of reasons, I think it understates the costs and it understates the values, and therefore, when we look at the rate of the green, it's an optimistic picture.
It's a very optimistic picture, particularly in today's environment. I'm very conscious that this is a plan for as much very close future as it will be for the long-term future. So very optimistic. We don't believe it probably will be all red. Very few greens. But it's almost, I think, I just relate back to the real terms that having practical, deliverable, understandable policies drives investment. If people look at this policy on the housing, and that drives investment. It's unreasonable, unrealistic. It has the counter effect. And that is not a good news story where we've got different notes.
Anyway, slow down on the housing policy. Just come through step by step. We'll get to that.
Sorry, so it's very difficult not to.
I just want to identify the moment, the costs, the assumptions in here, and the extent to which they are proportionate, justified. I can characterise it as some ways that it's a very optimistic.
Thank you. Say something quick before Tom gets into the specifics. I just wanted to sort of set the scene. I know this is in our statement of common ground. William, the Barclay Group have 5 strategic sites across the borough, 4 of which are gas holder sites, and collectively they will deliver over 10,000 homes to the borough, 30,000 square metres of non-residential floor space, and a range of infrastructure from schools to leisure to open space communities, etc. They're all subject to abnormal costs, in particular the gas holder sites, which have huge abnormal costs. And we've been working with the council over the last decade really to bring these sites forward and secure planning permission for them. And we welcome working collaboratively with them, and we really welcome the approach that they've taken to these sites. They have acknowledged the viability challenges that we face, and at application stage we've seen flexibility in how the applications are assessed to enable delivery. So our recent consents include Bromley by Gas Works, which we secured permission for in February. That's got 7 listed gas holders that need refurbishing. The level of affordable achieved was only 8%, but that was reflective of the substantial costs associated in part with refurbishing and retaining those gas holders, which was also a requirement. And then the resolution to grant effective gas works, again, subject to huge costs associated with delivering infrastructure and delivering 6% affordable housing. So just on a sort of strategic level, flexibility has been applied, and we just want to make sure that the local plan and policies continue to do that and continue to bake that into the plan and to ensure that deliverability can happen and the cumulative impact of policies is not going to hinder that delivery.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I think the first point to make is we are sympathetic that this is a point in time assessment, and in typical market conditions, it wouldn't be appropriate to be updating this assessment every it's 6 months to get a current data position. But we are in quite unprecedented times. The macroeconomics of development in London have completely changed over the last 18 to 24 months. It was only 12 months ago we had a publishing practice guidance with Accelerate House Building in London to December 24. Over the time period since then, it's become very clear that that hasn't moved the dial, housing delivery hasn't improved, and as a consequence, we now have the joint CLG and GLA guidance. So that tells you over the last 12 months there has been some significant challenges. So I think that's our key point really around this assessment being out of date. And it's reflecting where we are right now and the flexibility that is being advocated by the central government around things like SIL, affordable housing, design requirements. It seems to be out of kilter with this assessment of viability. Going through the specifics, I think we agree with the representatives from Ballymore that this is the most optimistic scenario in terms of viability across the borough rather than the average position. In relation to bill costs, the ECIS database, again, maybe previously when the market was moving slowly, it was a sense check, but the data that goes into that database lags the market quite considerably, so we don't believe that to be close to where the costs are at the moment. The abnormal costs piece is probably a more fundamental item because almost every site in this borough will have abnormal costs. Certainly all of the St William sites, which we just mentioned, have very substantial costs, and those costs are known costs. They're costs that have been agreed with the council through the viability process on the applications on those sites. We know now, obviously, we've seen that specific sites have been tested in the plan, but what isn't clear is have the scale of that norm been reflected. We set out in our hearing statement some of those costs, and certain sites ranging into the hundreds of millions of pounds. So then, they're very substantial and they fundamentally change the viability. That I'm not going to go through every single other input, but we certainly think the finance costs are below what is achievable in the current market. Likewise, marketing costs, given the challenges with sales and the extra expenditure that's required there. The profit margin, yes, that falls within the PPG range, but the PPG range was set at a very different time. The risk factor involved in development is tenfold what it was back then. We're in a position where interest rates are much higher, risk-free returns are much higher, and the premium that investors and funders are taking in terms of the risk premium is needs to then be added on top of that risk-free rate. We're in a scenario where insolvencies in construction firms are higher than any other industry in the country, so the risk profile has undoubtedly changed. But I think that's probably the big overview of our position. I think the only other point to make was there was some mention around the policy asks and the costs associated with them at the start of this topic, and each one being described as not having a material impact on viability. And I think our position really is looking at these in isolation is completely irrelevant. The only thing that is relevant is the cumulative impact, and I know we're about to come on to that, but just saying certain ones are, are much different. It isn't the way that policy needs to be required, and again, we'll come on to where we think there needs to be some flexibility.
Okay, but I think the only one that wasn't included in the cumulative figure was the building safety net, wasn't it? Correct. Sorry. So the work, the other ones?
Yes, sorry, no, I wasn't saying that they weren't added in. I'm just there's a lot of focus.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, certain things in isolation happening.
That's probably my fault, and that's probably because I've had in mind, well, when it comes to thinking about which policies to focus on, if this is telling us something, it's which policies we need to would be the remedy if there is an issue that needs addressing in terms of what normally asks add up to so we'll come back to those as we go through the policies. So you're trying to characterise your, rather than being an average, this scenario that this place would be the most optimistic.
Yeah, beyond the most optimistic in the current market.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. You want me to? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Can people hear? Okay. Is that all right? Okay.
Maybe put it a little bit closer.
Sorry, just to interrupt.
Sure.
You can turn the mic off, and I think if we turn the handheld mics off now, I think we've established that they are actually what's perhaps causing the interruption. So, just to keep everyone on their toes on a Tuesday morning.
So now we have a new. Now we have a new insurance. Back to the lady at the back of the room. If you can't, you could. But I mean, when you speak, do try and project it.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Used to doing that. Thank you very much, sir. Just a couple.
Then we need to pass that microphone around.
Just a couple of points.
Yeah.
First of all, it's a question about the property of the whole plan viability testing. The council has asserted by adopting it that the principle of application-specific viability appraisals is an accepted feature of the policy landscape in London, and I would disagree strongly with that. So I don't think that's the accepted principle. I think if that was the case, I think it would be reflected in the PPG, and it's not. And at every local plan examination in London, carefully look at the viability, because the objective is to ensure that in most cases, under most scenarios, the council's policies that have been proposed are viable. And generally, that is the case. Give or take, there are some places where it's about half and half. Schemes can't conform. But in general, most of the policies that are proposed by London boroughs with their affordable housing requirement, if that's not the London plan requirement, is generally accepted. Except, of course, recently in the case of Wandsworth Borough Council, where Wandsworth wanted 45% housing as the hurdle rate for the threshold approach, and that hasn't been accepted. Inspectors invited the council to go back through the main modifications to get back to London 35% rate. The PPG says it's the role of the viability assessment is primarily at the plan making stage. Viability assessment should not compromise sustainable development, but should ensure that policies are realistic and that the total cumulative cost of all the relevant policies are not undermined. Apologies, sir, for quoting that. I think because the council's asserted that viability assessment at the plan application stage is acceptable, I think it's important to remind people of that. The PPG says, and it goes on to say it is the responsibility of plan makers to create realistic deliverable policies. The problem with scheme-specific viability assessment is that it slows down plan making decision, which is what the other parties have referred to. And we believe that is one of the contributing factors to the collapse in completions and registrations, new schemes coming through. And indeed, in the government's and the GLA's launch of their new interim housing package, they have observed that starts have collapsed to a terrible level, and in 1/3 of boroughs, it starts last year. 1/3 of our research starts making sense. And the reason why I refer to the importance of the plan being realistic in the first place, in order to avoid, as far as possible, scheme-specific viability assessments, is the drain that takes on local planning authorities. And we produced a survey recently, sir, and our programme officers, we did this examination library, but in November 2025, we published a report called the State of Play Report, which was a survey of our SME members and to identify the major barriers they're experiencing. And the top barrier that they're experiencing is that SME house builders is delays in securing planning permission discharging conditions. The second is the lack of resources in local authority planning departments. And the fifth biggest obstacle is cumulative viability pressures. So the more schemes that you direct down scheme-specific viability assessments, the greater demands that will place on local authority staff. So you here, and its all development and resource development management team will be having more and more time to scheme-specific viability assessment in order to come up with an implementable planning permission. But you all know that, so I do apologise. Then the second point that I wanted to make, sir, is about this question about whether the employment and training contributions have been baked in already to the assumptions. And I don't disagree that they're not, except that Appendix 7 of the viability assessment, appraisals and results, employment and training, does appear to model the effects of those employment and training policies and those contributions sought. It isn't clear, and this is the point that I made in the original representations, but also my Matter 1 statement, it isn't clear whether they be considered in combination with the other requirements in the local plan. But if you work through Appendix 7 and you look at the 60% affordable housing requirement, you will see that you've got a pretty big picture of viability.
And we're going to come on to that.
So that was my last point, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, and also the you mentioned the London Plan guidance that was published last week.
Yes.
So just to take a step back, we've got a London Plan that seeks to avoid scheme-specific viability assessments by setting up this fast track approach. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's for the reasons that you alluded to there. That it slows everything down and also the late stage reviews.
Yeah. Provide certainty for developers avoiding.
Yeah.
Because they don't like late stage reviews.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the document that was published last week, referenced in something, but I saw it, and that was a draft proposal for a period of time to reduce the fast track percentage from 35 to 20.
Correct. It's a proposal that's now out for consultation. The deadline is the 22nd of January. Yes, to reduce it to 20% as a temporary measure up until March 2028, or when the next London Plan is published in January. It is unclear whether that means if it's an adopted London Plan or a draft plan, which might be published in the autumn next year.
Okay. I just wanted to get that context. So, right, I'm going to come back to the council on this first item of the viability, which is about the evidence. As I said at the beginning, you can always make different assumptions. The question for me is whether the council's approach is proportionate. I've heard reasons why it isn't, because of particular circumstances that have changed. I've heard the conclusion of the bottom line of that being, well, if I do look at those findings, they're on the optimistic side rather than on the cautious side. So do you want to, if there's any specifics, come back to, otherwise respond to those general points?
Yeah, there are quite a few points there that I will come back on.
Okay.
But just an overriding point. I think the question for you, sir, is where all this takes you in terms of policy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is the number, really. You would have seen in the tables in the assessment that were tested with an area of affordable housing requirement. Some schemes can't do any affordable housing on our testing, despite what the other side is saying are optimistic assumptions. So even on our optimistic assumptions, we're acknowledging that some sites can't deliver any affordable housing. And that's entirely consistent with what's being said about live schemes on the other side. So yes, there are schemes that have come forward with as little as 8% affordable, some with much higher levels of affordable. And the total delivery in 2023 affordable housing was 39% overall. So some sites have delivered less, some have delivered more. So that's the backdrop that policy is set within. So whether or not we assumed another 5% on interest rates, another 25% on marketing costs, it would have made the outcome slightly worse, not markedly, but you'd have the same issue in policy making that the boroughs facing, which is how do you craft a policy that works for these very different scenarios, from straightforward vanilla brownfield sites all the way through to complex gas holders that have great modest gas holders on. And the answer the council has come up with, which is entirely consistent with the approach and common plan, is to adopt an ambitious target that they acknowledge can't afford to be delivered. And it will not stop any schemes coming forward if they are burdened by particular more costs or listed gas holders or whatever else. Because as evidenced by the application of the policy in the current plan, seems to come forward with less.
Okay.
So that was the overarching. With regards to some of the specific points that were raised, there was a suggestion from Ballymore that growth was built in. We have, just to be clear, we have provided sensitivity analysis assessment as we're required to provide the RCS guidance. We don't rely upon those in the conclusions of the study, but all those analyses do is to illustrate what could happen with a set of inflation rates. We attach no more weight to them than that they are set as a decision maker. In terms of the fast track route, whether or not that would markedly alter delivery, the current approach in Newham is to divide the to test everything. So there is an adopted policy approach. There is no fast track in Newham, so everything is tested.
Well, the plan was adopted after that policy, so I'm not sure if that's right.
Yeah, but in terms of...
Well, it may be practice, but anyway, look, I'm leaving that. Let's just go with the assumptions in a minute, and we'll go on to the findings and the policy later, if you could, please.
I've made this point already, but in terms of the values being optimistic and costs being stated, again, as we've shown in testing, there is a variety of outcomes, and those would be very slightly worse if there were lower values and higher costs. Just skipping through because there are so many points. Yeah, there was a point made around housing delivery is stalled and macroeconomics are very different. Yes, housing starts have fallen, but the council is clearly looking at a 15-year plan, and it not necessarily based all of its decisions on current market conditions. And the issue with house building at the moment, home building, say in London, is that there are difficulties selling private flats. That's the main driver, is not house requirements and stopping developers from starting schemes. Is that they are not confident they can sell the flats. And that's likely to be a temporary phenomenon. And it's less acute in Europe because Europe has lower sales values than other parts of London. So it's less reliant upon overseas markets. But over the long term, we can't necessarily, or the council can't necessarily simply throw their hands up in the air and say, well, current housing starts are what they are. Let's throw out their affordable housing requirement. It's entirely it appears to be that they've got to have a path that's reasonable and flexible.
Okay, well, I'll deal with the policy and the findings. If there's anything else about the assumptions in the evidence?
I'm just going through the other points. Yeah, what the testing says, and it does illustrate like policy making, but that's what this work does.
I'm going to come on to the findings.
Okay.
In a minute, with the tables, the reds and the greens.
On timing,
Yeah.
timing planning applications was made by Mr. Stevens. We're involved in a lot of testing applications, stage viability assessments. Very often with Mr. Hatch and his colleagues from Quad and the firms involved in this field. I would say in most cases, it's not the viability assessment that holds up the application. There is an array of matters that have to be addressed in any application. And very often the viability is done with us in terms of agreed and put to bed long before the application is due to go. So I don't recognise the characterisation that seems to put around viability holding schemes up, because generally speaking, it doesn't. London authorities, they are well resourced in terms of viability assessment. They typically either have in-house staff or they rely on external advice. GLA has its own viability team as well. So generally speaking, viability is not a matter that slows schemes down.
Okay. Anything else on?
Sorry, just one last point with regards to employment and training.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, they are included in all of the
Cumulative tables. The column that the other ones are then subsequently added to.
So in assessment in ED 11 and ED 12, provided by the council yesterday, that's included in the training. And that's it includes all the other policies of building safety.
Okay. So a number of you alluded to what this actually shows us, and obviously that is what I want to get onto. But it was necessary to go through that to understand, what the picture is based upon. Your position is, well, it's adequate and proportionate. It's a point in time. Things can go up and down. It's still adequate and proportionate. That's the council's position. Others have said, well, it is an optimistic view of the world based on the way things have changed since he was undertaken. So I think that's where that went. But what I think most people have alluded to is, well, what does it tell us anyway? So let's have a look at that. 10 past 12. So I think I'm just going to have 5 minutes pause, just to have another break, and then just come at this last sort of 45 minutes. So just 5 minutes, and I'm just going to stretch my legs and whatever. So we'll be back at just after 3:15.
Spoke to the IT.
Oh yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, I think we can use the mics, but what we can do is have them turned off when they're not being used, and then just speaking, you turn it on just for when you're speaking.
Is it workable?
The background noise of the other mics, like people touch the papers or just making small noises, I think is
The main reason the mics is to amplify the
Amplify the
voices in here.
Yeah.
Because
No, I agree.
listening online and it's
fine, isn't it?
without them.
I was going to say, if everyone's happy with the noise level in here, it might be just easier to not.
I think we'll just leave them for now. And then
Yeah,
feel
I
like
think that's probably a good idea.
if I could,
As long as everyone's happy. It's a bit risky. I think it's quite bad.
it's fine.
You just move it.
Itself away from the mic, or if
Yeah.
background. I think it's anyway.
Yeah.
I've asked anyone that asked me.
Yeah, I think that's probably easier because you can put it at the back end. there might be more issues.
Yeah, I think as far as the live streaming, it's clearer.
And did you ask the lady about if she can do that, or you're asking? What was she saying that she could hear from?
Yeah, so I went to speak to her. So I think what we just need to make sure is that everybody's going to be able to learn it really well.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Because this is a public gallery here to people need to be heard.
Yeah, so did you ask her that? Did you ask her if she could hear the room?
Yeah.
I think as long as there's no
As the session.
Oh, okay.
yeah. And we don't need that. Yeah. The guys like
If it becomes
yeah, we can try that. It's difficult.
I mean, I know we've done it.
Also, I think it's not the when the person is having the conversation, it's going to be on like either, yeah. So then there's going to be issues there. I think it's definitely a lot more simple.
For the purpose of people listening,
Yeah.
so I think it's almost continue to monitor this. We'll just keep it, yeah.
We're not going to go with the mics. It's too complicated. I think we've got to have to test it again.
Well, we can always.
As long as in the room everyone's happy and can hear each other, I think it's a lot easier to.
Well, that's fine. Okay. Thank you, anyway. Right. So let's move on to the final item under the matter one. Which is what the viability assessment, wasn't adequate or optimistic, tells us. And we've had that presented. Thank you, Mr. Lee, for responding quickly to my requests on Friday. Hopefully others have had a chance to see it. As I said, it doesn't present a different picture. It just presents it in a different, well, it doesn't tell us anything different here than it did before. It just presents it in a way that I think I can understand and focus in on a little bit more. So, obviously we know what the approach is, and we've got the table. So the thing I'm going to be referring to is E12, which are the 6 tables provided, published yesterday on the website. So hopefully if you've got those, that's what I'm going to be referring to. And so there's 3 tables for 60% affordable housing and 3 for 35% affordable housing. And there's 3 different benchmark values. Okay, so that's what we've got. Right, so let me, the first thing that was clarified, and you said it again today, that the tables originally added all the cumulative payouts. So the original tables in the viability report, the right-hand column was the cumulative total one. Yeah. So that's what we've used to reflect in these tables in E12. Yes. These are the total, so these potential of all those cumulative costs. So I'm looking first at an example in BLV1, the 60% affordable housing in ED12, and I'm going to scroll down to row 23. So this is N17 SA1. So that in the plan, the allocation box refers to this being an 85 hectare site. Yep. And it describes a variety of land uses within those 85 hectares. So that's the allocation that this is addressing. I've gone to row 23 because there's a number of scenarios for vector Riverside, X17 SA1. But the figure for the number of units of 7378 is the figure that's in the ED8 pro forma trajectory, so the council's latest position on the scale of development of this site. I'm looking for affirmation. There's a number of different figures for number of units. And yet, the 738 figure is one of the scenarios. It's the one that I think is in the latest trajectory that you put forward.
It's going to be scenario 2, which is the correct figure, yeah.
So that's what it doesn't particularly. I'm picking that one up because that's, I think, where the council is saying this. That's the assumption. Right. It refers to a site area of 22.1 hectares. That is of the 85 allocation. Is that an approximate developed area based on the capacity testing? So where have you got the figure from?
Yeah, well, the council provided the site areas.
So that's a developable area?
Yes. I assume so. We'd need to look at that. But some of these are carved up, so the plan may identify an area, but within that there's an area to be developed and the rest is not being developed.
Well, the allocation is an indicative layout on the indicative diagram, and some of it's not being developed and there are developable areas. So anyway, the council provided that. So that's the best estimate of the developable area, and that's what the capacity is based on. And so the viability then works that uses that because that then generates a benchmark land. Yeah. Right. So do you want to clarify something here?
Yeah, I just want to say everyone that we have to check outside of the session because it doesn't necessarily seem correct. So we just have to have a look at that.
I'm using this as an example.
Yeah.
When we go through all of the allocations this week and next, we're going to be asking questions about these tables, the allocation, which row, what it tells us about what this tells us about the viability of each allocation. Yeah? So I'm using this as an example. We'll come back to vector Riverside another time. But this is the evidence we've got. This is what it tells us. Okay. So what it tells us here is there's a benchmark land value based on this benchmark value of 6.3 million per hectare. Yep, 140 million. So that's maths, presumably 22 times 6.3, yeah? So you're working out a benchmark land value for this site based on the developable area and that. Okay. And then we work through, we've got the red column, and it tells us the residual land value based on the policy requirements of the plan. It's minus 375 million, yeah? And it also tells us in the next column, and I asked this question, caveated slightly because I've been asking for something that's stupid. It was to get some sort of meaningful comparison for what this sort of scale residual land value plus or minus is, and a comparison is the developer profit. That's not 17.5%. So the developer profit on this scheme would be 334 million. Yeah. So you can tell me, other people tell me that's a meaningful figure. Compare these other benchmark land values. That's the way I thought. So then the final column was the difference between what the actual land value would need and what the residual land value is. So this case, you add the two together in effect. So it'd be short by 5.15 million or thereabouts. Yeah. Yeah. So this is clear. So that's understood. So that shows that it's clearly not viable on these assumptions.
60% full.
Yeah. It's not marginal. It's not that long.
So in our particular case, policy would.
No, slow down. I've got the long one step at a time. So I'll come on to right. Okay. Thank you. So then we look at the next benchmark land value table, which some of the figures are the same. Row 23 and various things are the same. But in this case, the benchmark land value it's a bit lower. It's 5.3 million per hectare. Therefore, the benchmark land value we're looking for this scheme is a bit lower. But the residual land value is the same. It's the same. But the difference between the benchmark land value and the residual land value has got a bit smaller. And I think the table was correct, is it not? Because I think the figure.
Yeah, so yesterday there were two documents issued. The first one contains the correct numbers. This
column was not had the same figure in, even though it should have been. Yeah. So I'm looking at the one that was put there now. So that just shows that on that assumption of benchmark land value, it's still got a big gap, but it's small. And then finally on the 0.5 million hectare per hectare benchmark land value, the gap's smaller again, but it's still significant. So on all of those, whichever assumption you made about the site, which is the most appropriate benchmark land value, it may be something in the mix. A site like this, so somewhere in the middle of those, or something may say, well, actually, it's higher, but it's
or actually contain some of one, some of two, some of three.
So you may be looking at somewhere, really benchmark land value, maybe somewhere in the middle of 0.5 up to 6.3 million per hectare. So it uses the picture. Okay, thank you. Right, understood that. So we can do exactly the same exercise with 35%, and it's exactly the same. So on this side, we can scroll down and look at the next three tables, and we see the viability improving. So the costs to residual land value improves, the gap between the development profit goes up, and the gap between benchmark land values comes down. So on this one, it's still, even with 35%, the London plan fast track could apply in the absence of this plan. That would still show the same. It would be not viable. Would it be? It would still be on that. It wouldn't be marginal. Correct. What would marginal look like?
Marginal. Well,
residual land value being
close to 5% to the benchmark. Plus or 5%.
Plus 5%. Close to the.
Close.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So we can go using that table. We can look through each allocation based on the appropriate row, and we can get a picture as we go through. I'm not going to go through like that. We can go through them one by one. But just on an overview, if you scroll down here on 60%, there's not much green, is there?
No, sir.
And well, if we go down on 60%, first one, the 60% and the highest benchmark land value. We've got a site in Stratford, which is marginally viable. Stratford. That's it.
Stratford is the highest value part of the borough. So that's the area that used to be in the corporation area. Part of the
same with the next BLV. Right, okay. So that's what we've got, and I've explained how I'm going to use it in the individual allocations. But the picture it paints is as described. This ask is clearly showing that it's not a. So the question is, I'm not going to get an answer to this today, but these are the things I will be thinking about, and you will be wanting to advise me about. If this demonstrates that the 60%, well, no, not necessarily. If this demonstrates that the cumulative effect of the policies of the plan are to make development not viable, what would be the options to address that soundness issue? Now, obviously, one thing that would probably be the most significant would be the affordable housing proportion. But there will be other things, I suppose, and it would be a mixture of the importance to the council's priorities, what things it wants to ask for, and the effect that the policy requirement has on the viability. Those two things we have to use Q to weigh those up in the first instance to prioritisation if it comes to that. So I'm just putting that out there now. Yeah. So anything that the council wants to say at this stage about what I've just said in response to what I've just said in terms of the table, the allocations.
Very quick point.
Yes, please.
Before the officers on policy. So I think it's important to. I know you asked for this, and it is helpful in setting out the cumulative extent the impact of the policy in its entirety. I think it's also important to have regard to table 6.3.1, 6.32, and so on. In the assessment that show what happens with everything from 0% to 60%, because that reflects how policy can be applied, and that's clearly not agree in those tables, depending on the affordable housing percentage, and it reflects what we've heard about schemes on the ground, coming forward with everything from 8% to much higher levels. Just to draw your attention to those tables as well.
Yeah, the tables I looked at start with, I saw an awful lot of red, and there was some green. But that would be switching off some of the policy requirements.
Well, table 6.3.1, all it's doing is getting all the underlying policies in place, but it's varying the affordable housing percentage.
Yeah. Yes, I understood. Yeah.
So it's not saying anything else.
No, sorry, I misunderstood. You can also go back across the cumulative impact column.
Yes, you could do it that way
as well, couldn't you? And see what effect those had as you switch some of those off. But then we see the question then as well, it's back to the philosophical point, isn't it? The extent to which plan sets up this ask, and then it all has to be worked back from at the application stage, or the plan is modified to be more realistic based on this, which say, well, you may then say, well, that means we won't ever get any of this stuff because we're not even asking for it.
I think this is underlined by table 6.3.1 and the other tables.
Yeah.
You that kind of outcome almost leads you to a policy position whereby you have to set a rate or a target for every single time in advance of and that would be both impossible to set and also to implement, which is why every other council in London is faced this dilemma of its broad array of results has adopted a policy that reflects the London plan, i.e. set a high target but be prepared to accept less when schemes come forward. And I know what Mr. Seeker's view on this is. He's articulating that. But every other London borough has done the same approach. They've set a high target, even though their testing has indicated that there's this huge array of results ranging from 0% upwards.
Not quite as bad as this.
Many assessments that have this sort of outcome.
Just tell me what page on the report, there's table 6.
On page 42, so.
Let's have a quick look at it. Yeah, the ones obviously I looked at. Yeah, 6.3.1. That's the 60. Oh no. Where's the table? 6. I want tables 6.60.4.
Yeah, so the reason I don't point to those is because they embed in them an affordable housing level. They're saying if you embed that affordable housing level, so that they're similar to ED, ED12, so that they're affordable. Saying, given that as a baseline, what else would schemes do? Whereas 6.3.1, it does something quite different. It embeds all of the policies and then says, let's look at affordable housing from 0% to 60%.
Yeah, I can see. So then you can start looking at some green and say, well, okay, you only have to go back to this side, back to 50% or whatever. but it all, same point, isn't it? It's all where you would end up at the planning application stage. Okay, right. Anything from this side on what we just talked about and what these tables tell us? Yeah.
Just one point, just on that last discussion. I mean, the point about the local plan is that it sets price signals, and you need to know what the policies are. Otherwise, landowners can say, well, it's going to be down to the applicant to negotiate every position. So that's why that principle of being clear what your policy expectations are is critical to successful plan making and delivery.
So the point being, if you set up all these requirements and then you know you're going to have to backtrack from what's done, it just creates uncertainty and ambiguity. That's it, William.
Yeah, so I think our primary concern really is without flexibility throughout policies that have costs associated with them, then as Dr. Lee has said, the only lever is the affordable housing, and it's not explicit from the study. Obviously, we've got a different opinion in terms of how optimistic it is, but our interpretation is we're looking at very low levels of affordable housing across the board. And that creates two issues really. One, obviously, the key objective of the plan is to meet housing needs, to meet identified need. And the second one, which I think was just alluded to there a bit, was the increased risk of refusal. At planning committees, there's an expectation for 60% affordable housing being viable and deliverable. And that playing through does cause delays, it does cause challenges, and ultimately could result in reduction in both affordable housing and private housing.
Okay.
I'll just have
Yes, please.
just wanted to make a point around sort of compliance with the London plan and the approach that has been taken there. Obviously, we've seen the emergency measures published recently. And yes, they're being termed as emergency measures, but we think they could also be a signal of the direction of travel for the next London plan. And the direction of travel document for the next London plan talks about how the objective is to not increase the overall burden of planning policy requirements on development under the current circumstances. And that opportunities will also be taken to streamline requirements and speed up consideration of planning applications. And some policy requirements may be phased, so they start to apply at a later date, for example, when economic conditions or technologies improve. So there's a clear signal there that slightly more innovative or different approaches to policy needs to be taken to incentivise delivery. So just wanted to flag.
Yeah. So obviously the affordable housing policy, this plan, is a bigger policy ask than the London plan. But we'll come back to the individual policies, but are there any, is the overall picture, there's more asks in here? You can identify those as we go through the policies, right? But as an overview, that's what you would say. It's adding more. Okay, Bellable.
Just quickly, I think, obviously, stable, and it's pretty gloomy. I mean, it's
red, isn't it?
It's not viable, so I suspect taking policies taken as a collection of be deliverable as they stand today. And I think just the point we haven't really talked about, to why people aren't building. But one of the biggest factors is risk. And risk is a combination of a number of issues. But risk policy and the policy that's drafted, the policy that's adopted, is an influence on risk. And if that policy is not reflected, it's even reasonably deliverable. And that will be taken into account by developers, by funders, when they're looking where to invest and build housing in London. And it is really important. We do want a workable, deliverable plan here. In our position, we've got a number of sites coming forward, and it's really important we have a deliverable plan. It must be realistic.
So it's the same point that if you've got all these policy asks and you know you're not going to be able to achieve it, it just creates that uncertainty. It deters
uncertainty. And it's an uncertainty possibly two ways. I know I just alluded to it, but we've sat at planning committees quite quite rightly, a council to ask us, well, why aren't we 60% or 50% more house? That's our policy. Why aren't we doing it?
Yeah.
And there is an answer. It's a complicated answer.
Because it's that cumulative picture.
Exactly. But that's a reasonable question.
Yeah, yeah.
So when policy is adopted, it creates an expectation, not just for councils, but also with the population. And you quite right say, well, we need affordable housing. And the question is, I mean, we'll come on to affordable housing. We'll say that this policy approach doesn't support housing. It possibly, in some ways, dissuades you from go down. If you have to go down the viability testing route, you'll never achieve that. Then it's possibly have an impact. But I think that's just for us, it's an important thing. It's so vital policy rights in the sense that it's deliverable. It gives us a bit of certainty, it reduces that risk. I think that's a big piece in trying to get the housing industry moving forward.
Okay, well, the way that the policies are expressed, so, I mean, there's this macro picture of the totality of the asks and the cumulative impact, which it may be that I will come back to the council because they will say, well, if something has to give, where is it that the council wishes that to be? And then there's the individual approach to the policy asks at each time. So there they come, two different things, I think. So coming back to various ways as we go through the different matters and issues over the course of these weeks and to January and February. Okay, well, thank you. Is there anything else anybody wants to say on viability? As I said, I think based on, it doesn't have to be only based on that ED12 table, but when I go through the allocations, you can tell me, well, actually this one, it only needs to, this one would be viable if it was only, 20% or something, you paint a more nuanced picture. But otherwise, I'll be looking at, crudely, what does it tell us after this allocation based on, the scenario that it is. And, so, yeah,
in that vein, sir, would it help if we reduced table 6.3.1 that has the
names in.
level step with the names on?
It would help with the names in, yeah.
Okay, well,
and then we can maybe, so it's just that one table, is it? The one that you think is,
well,
there's a different group on
what I think would help you is 6.3.1, 0.2, 0.3, would give you, and 5 and 6 as well. So we'll give you all of them.
Those six. And they're 3 for 60%. What are those? Why is the 6 then?
They relate to different tenure mixes and also different benchmark land values.
So
one is 83, 17 split, one is 75, 25. And you can look at them if you need to.
There's so many figures I can. I thought I'd go down to one column.
Yeah, I think it's as you rightly pointed out, it's more nuanced than one column.
Well, it is and it isn't. It's like what the plan says is what the plan says. Everything else then has to be negotiated.
Yes, the plan doesn't propose 60%.
It does unless you sort it out of the application stage.
It's not being applied as a quota that's fixed in stone.
Okay, right. Okay. Anything else from anyone? No. So thank you for that. We've got through matter 1 this morning. That was helpful. We've got matter 2 this afternoon, which obviously it's called notice development required in the plan period. And I mustn't forget to look at the industrial office requirements. But obviously the housing requirement, the questions are not really about the questions, it's about the approach and how that is set to do that. I think everyone here this morning is saying this afternoon. Yep. But we've got a couple of extra participants as well. So what are we doing about the microphones this afternoon then? On, off, not? Thank you. Thank you for your hard work on it.
That's all right. Don't worry. Thanks.
Right, okay. So we will resume at 2 o'clock. Sorry.
Sorry, just got a question.
Yes.
With regards to viability consultant.
Yes.
Viability expert. When
I don't think I'll be able to say any more about the evidence system. We've got it. We've got the tables that I've asked for and some other ones that we can refer to. So I don't think it's really a matter of scrutinising the evidence again. It's about what it tells us and what the policy response is. So I don't think I'll be asking questions of clearly. So I'll leave it with you. So, talk to that. So, thank you. So thank you again for having the information.
It's like only cabs access and that, but then members of the public could come in. So I could say to the public, but yeah, just because I can't guarantee, but I think it'd be highly unlikely. Sorry. Yeah, it's not.
I think we do this lot of because of the idea.
Okay, here we are.
I would
But some people don't stay. Yeah, well, if you're going to wait until. If there's no need, we'll not be
My name is Lucy Rogers.
Yeah. Oh, right, yeah. I thought it was Lucy, but I thought maybe this was yours.
Yeah,
so Lucy. I see, yeah. It's not the same Lucy.
I'll stay up the room a little bit when we start. Maybe
Yeah.
listen. She's still saying she can't.
When I was on it, it's like, it's not like perfect. I think it sounds like,
I think it's clear.
I can hear it, yeah.
I don't. I mean,
I mean, when I was on it, it was much better with this than with the
I
mics.
can hear people.
Yeah.
But,
Oh, I agree.
I can hear.
Sorry, can I just pause the stream?
Sorry.
Okay.